The emergency alarm screamed through Metropolitan General's pediatric wing at 3:47 p.m., and Lauren Whitmore's perfectly controlled world shattered in the time it took her daughter to stop breathing. 7 floors below, Ethan Cole was mopping the administrative hallway when the intercom crackled with words that would change everything. Code Blue, Pediatric ICU. We need O-negative blood immediately. Universal donor required for emergency transfusion. His hand stilled on the mop handle. O-negative. The rarest type. His type. But he didn't move. Not yet. Because 6 hours earlier, the woman whose child was dying had looked straight through him like he didn't exist and called him just the help in front of 50 people. Now her daughter's life depended on the blood running through his invisible veins. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop a comment with your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this beginning pulled you in, stay until the end. You won't regret it. Ethan Cole had learned long ago that invisibility was a survival skill. At 38 years old, he moved through the gleaming corridors of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals' corporate headquarters like a ghost in navy blue coveralls, pushing his cleaning cart past executives who never glanced up from their phones, past assistants who stepped around him without breaking stride, past security guards who nodded but never actually saw him. He'd perfected the art of taking up no space, making no sound, leaving no impression beyond the faint scent of industrial cleaner and the spotless floors that appeared magically clean each morning as if contamination had never existed. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he worked the third-floor executive wing, the same route he'd traveled 5 nights a week for the past 3 years. His daughter Mia's medical bills had erected a wall between who he used to be and who he'd become, and somewhere along that journey, Ethan had stopped fighting the transformation. He'd been an aerospace engineer once, the kind of person who spoke at conferences and held patents, who solved problems that existed in 3 dimensions most people couldn't visualize. But that man had died in the same ICU where his wife Sarah had spent her final 6 months, buried under medical debt that had consumed their savings, their home, and finally his career when he'd had to choose between keeping his position and being present for the woman he loved as cancer slowly, methodically, stole her away. 3 years later, the bills were still there. Mia was still there. And Ethan had become very good at being no one. He was emptying a trash bin near the executive conference room when he heard voices rising inside, sharp, clipped tones that suggested the meeting had gone off script. Ethan knew better than to linger, but his cart was positioned directly outside the glass-walled space, and leaving abruptly would draw more attention than staying still. So he worked slowly, methodically replacing the liner in the bin, while fragments of conversation drifted through the partially open door. These efficiency metrics are unacceptable. The voice was female, cold as January rain. I don't pay people to make excuses. I pay them to produce results. Ms. Whitmore, with respect, we've already cut support staff by 30%. Then cut another 30%. I want lean operations, not comfortable employment. This company didn't become an industry leader by coddling mediocrity. Ethan's hand stilled briefly on the trash bag. Lauren Whitmore. He'd seen her exactly 3 times in 3 years, always at a distance, always moving fast, always surrounded by a bubble of anxious executives trying to keep pace. She was younger than he'd expected when he'd first started, maybe 40, with the kind of severe beauty that came from excellent genetics and expensive maintenance. Dark hair always pulled back tight enough to hurt, suits that probably cost more than he made in 6 months, heels that struck the marble floors like a judge's gavel. What about the custodial contracts? Another voice asked. We could renegotiate terms. Do it, Lauren said immediately. I want proposals on my desk by Friday showing 20% reduction in facilities costs. If the current vendors can't meet those terms, find ones who will. Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. 20% reduction in facilities costs meant wages cut or positions eliminated. It meant people like him, already scraping by, would scrape by on even less, or not at all. But he'd learned not to react, not to show anything. He tied off the trash bag and moved his cart silently down the hall, away from the conference room and the casual discussion of making invisible people even more invisible. The rest of his shift passed in the usual rhythm: vacuum the executive suites, sanitize the bathrooms, wipe down the break room surfaces that important people touched without thinking about who made them clean. At 11 p.m., he clocked out and drove his 15-year-old Honda across town to pick up Mia from his neighbor Rosa's apartment. Rosa was 64 and watched Mia for almost nothing because she was lonely and Mia was good company, and some people still believed in helping each other for reasons that had nothing to do with efficiency metrics. Mia was asleep on Rosa's couch, her math homework scattered across the coffee table, her dark hair, so much like Sarah's it still hurt to look at sometimes, falling across her face. She was 9 years old and too serious for her age, old enough to understand they didn't have much, but young enough to still believe that love and safety mattered more than money. Ethan wanted to keep her in that space for as long as possible. She ate all her dinner, Rosa whispered, helping him gather Mia's backpack and homework. Smart as a whip, that one. Finished her math in 20 minutes and then helped me with my crossword puzzle. Thank you, Rosa. I don't know what we'd do without you. Rosa patted his arm. You'd figure it out. You're a good father, Ethan. Don't let anyone tell you different. He carried Mia to the car, buckled her into the back seat where she barely stirred, and drove the 12 minutes to their apartment in a building that had been nice about 30 years ago. Upstairs, he tucked her into bed, kissed her forehead, and stood for a moment watching her sleep with the kind of fierce protectiveness that never quite faded even when she was safe. In the kitchen, he made himself instant coffee and sat at the table with the stack of bills he'd been avoiding. Medical bills from Mia's last specialist appointment. She had juvenile arthritis, another gift from the genetic lottery that had already taken Sarah. Electric bill. Water bill. The notice from the landlord about the rent increase starting next month. The numbers didn't add up. They never added up. But somehow they always just barely worked out, because Ethan had become an expert in making impossible math function through a combination of careful budgeting, occasional overtime, and simply doing without anything that wasn't absolutely essential. His phone buzzed. A text from his supervisor. Schedule change. Need you 6 a.m. tomorrow for emergency cleanup before board presentation. Double time. Ethan closed his eyes. Double time meant he could pay the electric bill in full instead of the minimum. It also meant 4 hours of sleep instead of 6. And missing the morning routine with Mia where they ate breakfast together and she told him about whatever book she was reading. But double time was double time, and people like him didn't turn down double time. He texted back, I'll be there. 4 hours later, his alarm dragged him out of thin, unsatisfying sleep. He dressed in the dark, left a note for Mia with her breakfast money and instructions to lock the door and go straight to school, and drove back across town to Whitmore Pharmaceuticals through a gray dawn that suggested rain. The building was nearly empty at 6 a.m., just a few early executives and the security team. Ethan's supervisor met him in the lobby with the strained expression of a man who'd been awake all night dealing with something unpleasant. Third floor executive wing, he said. Someone's assistant knocked over a coffee cart during setup last night. It's everywhere. Carpet, walls, baseboards. Needs to be spotless before the 9 a.m. board presentation. Ethan nodded and took the service elevator up. The damage was worse than described. Not just spilled coffee, but what looked like an entire catering setup that had collapsed, spreading coffee, cream, sugar, and pastries across 30 feet of executive corridor. It would take him 3 hours of hard work to make it disappear. He started with the carpet, working on his knees with the extraction cleaner, methodically removing every trace of the stain. The physical work was meditative in its way, requiring attention but not much thought, and his mind drifted to Mia's upcoming doctor's appointment, to the rent increase, to Rosa's comment about him being a good father. He wondered sometimes if that was true or just something kind people said. Sarah would have known what to do, how to balance everything, how to make Mia feel secure even when nothing was secure. Ethan just kept moving forward because stopping wasn't an option. He was finishing the baseboard work when he heard heels clicking down the corridor, the distinctive sharp pace he recognized from the previous evening. He didn't look up, just kept working, making himself even more invisible than usual. The footsteps stopped a few feet away. You. The voice was Lauren Whitmore's, sharp and irritated. What are you doing? Ethan sat back on his heels, looking up at her for the first time. Up close, she was even more intimidating, not physically imposing, but carrying herself with the kind of absolute certainty that came from a lifetime of being obeyed. Her expression suggested she'd found something distasteful on the bottom of her expensive shoe. Cleaning the spill, ma'am, he said quietly. Should be finished in about 20 minutes. 20 minutes? Her eyebrows rose. The board arrives in 2 hours, and this hallway looks like a disaster area. I need this space perfect in 1 hour, not 20 minutes from now, plus however long it takes you to actually finish. The carpet extraction needs time to dry properly. I don't need a lecture on carpet maintenance. I need results. Can you do this job properly in 1 hour or not? Ethan felt the familiar weight of swallowing words that wouldn't help, of accepting blame for circumstances outside his control. I'll do my best, ma'am. Your best should have been good enough to prevent this from happening in the first place. She was already turning away, dismissing him. Next time, check the setup before you leave. This is exactly the kind of carelessness I was talking about yesterday. Something in Ethan went very still. I wasn't here yesterday evening, ma'am. This happened after my shift. Lauren stopped, turned back. Her expression suggested she couldn't quite believe he was still talking. Are you arguing with me? No, ma'am. Just clarifying that I wasn't responsible for the initial spill. I don't care who spilled it. I care that it's cleaned up properly and on time. Her voice had gone even colder. Your maintenance. Maintaining this building is literally your only job. If you can't handle that without making excuses, I'll find someone who can. The words landed with casual cruelty, the kind that came from someone who'd never had to think about what it meant to be on the receiving end. Ethan saw other people appearing now. Early arriving executives, assistants with coffee and tablets, all of them slowing down to watch the exchange. Being invisible was one thing. Being publicly humiliated was another. I understand, ma'am, he said quietly and returned to his work. Lauren made a sound of impatient dismissal and walked away, her heels striking the floor in sharp percussion. The small crowd dispersed, and Ethan was alone again with the stain that wasn't his fault, and the deadline that wasn't reasonable, and the hot shame that came from being treated like you were less than human in front of people who would never remember your face. He finished the job in 55 minutes. The hallway was perfect. No one thanked him. At noon, he drove to Mia's school to pick her up for her doctor's appointment at Metropolitan General Hospital. She was waiting outside the front office, backpack slung over one shoulder, her face lighting up when she saw him. That smile made every indignity worth it. How was school, sweetheart? He asked as she buckled in. Good. We're reading Bridge to Terabithia, and it's really sad but really good. How was work? Fine. Nothing exciting. She studied him with the uncanny perception of children who'd learned to read their parents' moods. You look tired. Just a long shift. I'm okay. The hospital was across town, a sprawling complex where Mia's rheumatologist had her office. They checked in and waited in the pediatric wing, Mia reading her book, while Ethan filled out the endless insurance forms that never quite covered everything. The appointment itself was routine, checking Mia's joint mobility, adjusting her medication dosage, discussing the exercises she was supposed to do daily. She's doing well, Dr. Chen said, smiling at Mia. Keep up with the physical therapy, and we'll see you again in 3 months. They were heading back through the hospital lobby when the world exploded. Later, Ethan would remember it in fragments, the sudden alarm screaming through the building, people in scrubs running, a woman's voice over the intercom cutting through the chaos with professional urgency. Code Blue, Pediatric ICU, we need O-negative blood immediately. Universal donor required for emergency transfusion. Any O-negative donors, please report to the second-floor donation center immediately. The lobby froze for a heartbeat, then resumed its chaos. Ethan's hand tightened on Mia's shoulder as nurses rushed past, as security began directing visitors away from the ICU wing, as the intercom repeated its desperate call. Daddy, Mia looked up at him. What's happening? Someone's hurt, he said quietly. They need help. What's O-negative? A blood type, a rare one. Mia was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, you have that, don't you? You told me once. He had. During one of those conversations about biology and genetics that Mia loved, he'd explained blood types and mentioned his was O-negative, the universal donor, the kind that could save anyone in an emergency. At the time, it had been abstract medical trivia. Now the intercom was screaming for it. I do, he admitted. Then we should go help, Mia said simply, with the unquestioning certainty of a child who still believed adults should help when help was needed. Ethan hesitated. He was exhausted from the double shift, still raw from Lauren Whitmore's casual cruelty that morning, and donating blood would mean missing the afternoon work he'd picked up to cover the rent increase. Every practical calculation said to leave, to prioritize his own family's precarious stability over a stranger's emergency. But Mia was watching him with Sarah's eyes, waiting to see what kind of man he was. "Okay," he said. "Let's go help." The second-floor donation center was controlled chaos. Nurses moving fast but precise, checking paperwork, verifying blood types, managing the sudden influx of potential donors who'd responded to the emergency call. A nurse with kind eyes and efficient hands checked Ethan in, verified his O-negative status with a quick fingerstick test, and immediately directed him to a donation chair. "You're a lifesaver," she said, not knowing how literally she meant it. "The patient is critical. We need this now." They hooked him up fast. Blood pressure check, sterile needle, the familiar pressure as blood began flowing through the tube into the collection bag. Mia sat in the chair next to him, swinging her legs and reading her book, occasionally looking up to make sure he was okay. Around them, other donors were being processed, but the nurse kept returning to check Ethan's flow rate with an urgency that suggested his donation was the critical one. "You're giving a lot," Mia observed, watching the bag fill. "Is that okay?" "It's fine, sweetheart. I'm just helping someone who needs it more than I do right now." 15 minutes in, a doctor appeared. Young, stressed, surgical cap still on. She conferred quietly with the nurse, checked Ethan's chart, then looked at him directly. "Mr. Cole, I need to be straight with you. The patient is a child, 7 years old, massive internal bleeding from a car accident. We need more blood than we'd typically take in one donation. I'm asking if you're willing to go to a double unit." Double unit meant twice the normal volume. It meant potential dizziness, weakness, recovery time. It also meant a 7-year-old girl might live instead of die. "Do it," Ethan said. The doctor's expression flickered with something like gratitude. "Thank you." They adjusted the collection, and Ethan felt the pull deepen, felt his body registering the loss. Mia had stopped reading now, watching with concern. "Daddy, are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby. Just a little tired." The minutes stretched, the bag filled. Nurses came and went with increasing urgency, and Ethan understood without being told that somewhere in this hospital a little girl was fighting for her life and his blood was the ammunition keeping her in the fight. Then, cutting through the controlled chaos, he heard a voice he recognized. "Where is she? I need to see her now." Lauren Whitmore burst into the donation center like a storm made flesh, still in her perfect suit, but with her hair coming loose and her face stripped of its usual cold control. She looked wild, terrified, completely undone, and she was heading straight for the nurse's station. "Ma'am, you need to stay in the waiting area." "That's my daughter in there," Lauren's voice cracked. Emma Whitmore, 7 years old, car accident on Madison Avenue. The nurse who'd checked Ethan in intercepted her, hands up in a calming gesture. "Miss Whitmore, I understand, but the surgical team is working on Emma right now. The best thing you can do is let them work." "I need to know what's happening. I need—" Lauren's voice broke completely. "Please, she's all I have." The nurse's expression softened. "She's receiving a transfusion now from a compatible donor. The surgeon will update you as soon as possible, but right now they're doing everything they can." Lauren seemed to deflate, all that rigid control collapsing into raw fear. Her eyes swept the donation center as if looking for something to anchor to, and then, inevitably, disastrously, her gaze landed on Ethan. Recognition flickered across her face. Confusion. Then, as she processed the IV line, the collection bag nearly full of dark red blood, the nurse checking his vitals. Understanding. The man she'd humiliated that morning was donating blood. Her daughter's blood type was O-negative. The math completed itself on her face in real time. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the donation center. Ethan saw everything in her expression. The horror of realization, the crushing weight of impossible gratitude, the shame of understanding that the person she'd treated as disposable was the person keeping her daughter alive. Lauren's mouth opened, closed. No words came out. "Ma'am," the nurse said gently, "you should wait in the family consultation room. We'll bring you updates." But Lauren didn't move. She stood frozen, staring at Ethan, at the blood flowing from his body to save a child whose mother had called him just maintenance 6 hours earlier. Mia, watching this exchange with a child's perfect clarity, leaned over and whispered, "Daddy, is that the lady from your work?" "Yes, sweetheart." "The mean one?" Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "That's her daughter who's hurt." Mia processed this with the same simple logic that had brought them here in the first place. "Then I'm glad we came to help." Those words landed on Lauren like a physical blow. She took one step toward them, then stopped, then tried again. "I didn't—" Her voice was barely audible. "I didn't know." "You couldn't have," Ethan said quietly. The exhaustion was setting in now, the blood loss making everything feel distant and strange. "It's okay." "It's not okay. This morning, She couldn't finish. Tears were streaming down her face now. All that perfect control shattered completely. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "Ms. Whitmore," the nurse intervened firmly, "you need to let Mr. Cole finish his donation. The consultation room is this way." Lauren let herself be led away, but she kept looking back at Ethan with an expression that would haunt both of them for a long time. The look of someone whose entire understanding of the world had just collapsed and was desperately trying to find something solid in the rubble. The doctor returned, checked Ethan's vitals, and finally removed the IV. "You did good," she said. "Really good. Emma's chances just went from critical to stable because of you." "Will she be okay?" "Too soon to know for sure, but you gave us a fighting chance. Rest here for at least 30 minutes. Drink this." She handed him juice and cookies. "And thank you." Ethan sat in the recovery area with Mia curled against his side, eating the cookies because Mia insisted, drinking the juice because dizziness was creeping in at the edges. Around them, the hospital continued its relentless rhythm, but something had shifted. The invisible man had become visible in the worst possible way, not through recognition of his humanity, but through the stark revelation that his humanity had been there all along, unnoticed and unvalued, until it was desperately needed. An hour later, the doctor found them again. "Emma's stable. She's going to make it." Relief washed through Ethan so intensely it surprised him. He'd never met this child, would probably never meet her, but knowing she would live felt important in a way he couldn't articulate. "Can you tell her mother?" he asked. "Already did. She's with Emma now." The doctor paused. "She asked if she could thank you personally." "That's not necessary." "I think it might be, for her anyway." Ethan understood what she meant. Lauren Whitmore was somewhere in this hospital confronting the consequences of her own cruelty, and part of that confrontation required facing the man she'd wronged. But Ethan was too tired for that conversation, too drained to navigate whatever complicated emotional landscape she was in. "Please tell her I'm glad Emma's okay," he said, "and that I hope she recovers fully, but I need to get my daughter home." The doctor nodded, understanding more than she said. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Cole. You're a good man." They left through the hospital's side entrance, Ethan moving carefully because the world still felt slightly tilted. Mia held his hand tighter than usual, her book forgotten in her backpack. "Are you okay, Daddy?" "I'm okay, baby. Just tired." "That was really brave." "It wasn't brave, it was just the right thing to do." "Can it be both?" He smiled down at her. "Yeah. I guess it can be both." They drove home through afternoon traffic, Mia quiet beside him. When they pulled into their apartment building's lot, she finally spoke again. "The lady, Ms. Whitmore, she was really scared." "She was." "Maybe she's not always mean. Maybe she was just mean that one time." Ethan wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe people were fundamentally good and just made mistakes. But 3 years of being invisible, of watching people step over him without seeing him, had taught him that meanness often wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a worldview. Still, he said, maybe. People are complicated. That night, after Mia was asleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with the bills again. The double-time pay from the morning would help, but the donation meant he couldn't pick up the extra evening shifts he'd planned for the rest of the week. The math still didn't add up. It never added up. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him check. The text was from Lauren Whitmore. I don't know how to thank you. I don't know if I can. Emma is alive because of you, because of your kindness to someone who showed you none. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that grace. LW. Ethan stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed a simple response. I'm glad she's okay. That's all that matters. He didn't know what happened next. Didn't know if Lauren would actually change, or if this was just guilt that would fade once the crisis passed. Didn't know if being visible for one day meant he'd stay visible, or if tomorrow he'd go back to being just the guy who cleaned the floors. What he knew was this: he'd done the right thing, and his daughter had watched him do it. Whatever else happened, Mia had learned that when someone needed help, even someone who'd hurt you, you helped anyway. Not because they deserved it, but because a scared little girl deserved a chance to grow up. And maybe, in a world that kept making him invisible, that small lesson passed to his daughter was the most visible thing of all. The message sat unanswered on Ethan's phone for 3 days. He told himself it was because he didn't know what to say, that any response felt inadequate or performative, that Lauren Whitmore didn't need his absolution and he didn't need her guilt. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. He was afraid. Afraid that engaging meant opening a door he'd carefully kept closed, afraid that visibility came with expectations he couldn't meet, afraid that the moment he stopped being invisible, he'd become responsible for somehow fixing the brokenness in people who'd never noticed he existed. So he went back to work, clocked in at 10 p.m., pushed his cart through the same corridors, emptied the same trash bins, made the same spaces spotless for people who would arrive in the morning and never think about who'd made it possible. The difference was that now, occasionally, people looked at him. Not many. Just a few executives who'd been in the building that morning, who'd witnessed Lauren's public breakdown in the donation center lobby before security had contained the situation. Their glances were brief and uncomfortable, the kind of acknowledgement that came from not knowing whether to say something or pretend nothing had happened. Ethan preferred the pretending. It was cleaner. On Thursday night, his supervisor caught him in the break room during his midnight lunch break. Tom was 56, had been managing facilities for 12 years, and treated his crew with the weary fairness of someone who understood they were all just trying to survive. Got something weird for you, Tom said, sliding a folder across the table. HR sent this down today, says you're being transferred to day shift, effective Monday. Ethan looked up sharply. What? Why? Didn't say, just orders from upstairs. Tom's expression was carefully neutral. Day shift pays the same, but the hours are better if you've got a kid. 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. instead of 10 to 6. Thought you'd be happy about it. Better hours meant being home when Mia got back from school. Meant not relying on Rosa every single night. Meant helping with homework and making dinner and being present for all the small moments that built a childhood. But it also meant something had changed, and Ethan had learned that when things changed suddenly in his world, it usually wasn't because the universe had decided to be kind. Did they say who requested the transfer? Tom shrugged. Executive decision, above my pay grade. He paused. Look, I heard some things about what happened at the hospital, about you donating blood. That was a good thing you did, Cole. Real good. Maybe someone upstairs noticed. Maybe. Or maybe someone upstairs felt guilty and this was easier than actually confronting what that guilt meant. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate the heads up. He took the folder home and showed it to Mia over breakfast the next morning. Her face lit up with the kind of pure joy that made everything worth it. You'll be home when I get back from school? Looks like it. Every day? Every day. She threw her arms around him, nearly knocking over her cereal. That's the best thing ever. Maybe it was. Maybe he should just accept the gift and stop interrogating its motives. But as Mia chattered about all the things they could do together after school, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being moved around a chessboard he couldn't see, positioned for purposes he didn't understand. The weekend passed in its usual rhythm: laundry, groceries, Mia's physical therapy exercises, a trip to the library where she checked out 6 books, despite his reminder that she could only read one at a time. Sunday evening, his phone buzzed again. Another message from Lauren Whitmore. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I understand that. But I wanted you to know Emma asked about you today. Asked about the man who gave me his blood. She wants to thank you. No pressure. I'll tell her you're busy if you'd rather not. But the offer stands if you ever want to meet her. She's home now, recovering well. LW. Ethan read the message 3 times. A 7-year-old girl who'd almost died wanted to thank the stranger who'd helped save her. It was innocent, pure, completely disconnected from the complicated adult dynamics between him and her mother. How could he possibly say no to that? He typed slowly. I'm glad she's home. I'd be happy to meet her if she really wants that. Let me know when works for you. The response came within minutes. Thank you. How about Saturday afternoon? We could meet somewhere neutral, maybe the cafe in City Park. 2 p.m. Ethan hesitated, then made a decision that surprised him. My daughter Mia would like to come too, if that's okay. She was with me at the hospital. Of course. Emma would probably love that. See you Saturday? He told Mia about it that night, watching her face carefully to gauge whether this was too much, too strange, too complicated. But Mia's response was characteristically simple. The girl who was hurt wants to say thank you? That's nice. Can I bring her one of my books? Being sick is boring. You don't have to bring her anything, sweetheart. I know, but I want to. So Saturday found them walking through City Park toward the cafe, Mia carrying a carefully selected copy of Charlotte's Web because it's about friendship and it made me feel better when I was sad. Ethan's stomach was tight with an anxiety he couldn't quite name. He'd spent the morning trying to figure out what you wore to meet the child whose life you'd saved, and her mother who'd publicly humiliated you, eventually settling on jeans and a button-down shirt that split the difference between casual and respectful. They spotted Lauren and Emma at an outdoor table before the Whitmores saw them. Emma was small for 7, pale in the way of children still recovering from trauma, with her mother's dark hair and a face that would have been unremarkable, except for the intense curiosity in her eyes as she watched the park around her like someone seeing the world fresh. Lauren sat beside her, looking nothing like the ice-cold executive from the corporate headquarters. No perfect suit today, just jeans and a soft sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, her whole posture oriented protectively around her daughter. Then Emma saw them approaching, and her face transformed with recognition and something like wonder. "Mom, is that him?" Lauren turned, and for a heartbeat their eyes met with the weight of everything unspoken between them. Then she stood, one hand on Emma's shoulder. "Emma, this is Mr. Cole, Ethan, and this must be Mia." "Hi," Emma said shyly, then with more courage. "Thank you for helping me. The doctor said your blood saved my life." Ethan crouched down to her eye level, feeling the familiar ache that came from looking at any child and seeing his own daughter's fragility reflected back. "I'm really glad I could help. How are you feeling?" "Tired a lot, and my stomach hurts where they did the surgery. But I'm okay." She looked at Mia with interest. "You were there too?" Mia nodded. "My dad took me to my doctor appointment, and then we heard them calling for help, so we went." "That was really nice of you." Emma's voice was soft but certain. "Most people don't help." The simple observation landed like a stone in still water. Lauren's expression flickered with something painful. "I brought you a book," Mia said, holding out Charlotte's Web. "It's one of my favorites. It's about a pig and a spider who become friends even though they're really different." Emma took the book carefully, like it was precious. "I love reading. Thank you." "Maybe we should let the adults talk and you two can sit over there," Lauren suggested, gesturing to a nearby bench in clear view but out of earshot. The girls looked at each other with the instant assessment children made, seemed to reach some mutual agreement, and headed for the bench. Mia was already explaining something about the book, and Emma was listening with the intensity of someone starved for normal kid interaction, which left Ethan and Lauren alone at the table. The silence stretched for a moment before Lauren spoke, her voice low and careful. "I don't know how to do this. I've been practicing what to say for a week, and everything sounds inadequate." "You don't have to say anything." "I do, though. I absolutely do." She met his eyes directly. "What I said to you that morning, the way I treated you, there's no excuse for it. I was cruel and dismissive, and I treated you like you weren't even human. And then 6 hours later, you saved my daughter's life without hesitation. Any decent person would have done the same thing." "No." Her voice was firm. "Most people would have walked away. Most people would have been justified in walking away after how I treated them. But you didn't. You stayed, you donated double the normal amount, you put yourself at risk for a child you'd never met. She paused, struggling with something. Why? Ethan looked over at the girls on the bench. Mia was showing Emma something in the book, both of them bent over it together. My daughter asked me a simple question at the hospital. Can we help? And the truth is, I spent 3 years teaching her that kindness matters, that you help people when they need it, that how you treat others is what defines you. If I'd walked away, what would that have taught her? That kindness only counts when it's convenient? That people only deserve help if they've been nice to you first? So you did it for Mia. I did it because a 7-year-old girl was dying and I could help. That's all. The rest, the history between us, that didn't matter in that moment. Lauren was quiet for a long time. I've built my entire career on efficiency and results, and not letting emotion cloud judgment. I cut budgets and staff because the numbers said it made sense. I pushed people harder because performance metrics said they could do more. And I never thought about the fact that every line item on a spreadsheet was a person with a life I was making harder. She looked down at her hands. Emma's accident happened because I was working late. Again. I'd promised to pick her up from art class, but I was in a meeting, so I sent a car service. The driver ran a red light. Emma almost died because I prioritized profit margins over being present for my own daughter. That's not your fault, isn't it? I've spent 15 years telling myself that ruthless efficiency is necessary, that being hard is the same as being strong, that compassion is weakness in the business world. And then I watched my daughter almost bleed to death, while the only person who could save her was someone I'd treated as disposable that very morning. You know what the worst part is? Ethan waited. I didn't even remember you. When I saw you in that donation center, it took me a full minute to place where I knew you from. I'd been so casually cruel to you, and I didn't even remember doing it because you weren't important enough to remember. That's who I've become. The raw honesty in her voice was uncomfortable to witness. Ethan had spent years being angry at people like Lauren Whitmore, people who wielded power carelessly, who made decisions that hurt people without having to see the consequences. But sitting across from her now, watching her try to hold together the pieces of a worldview that had shattered, he found the anger had dulled into something more like sadness. People can change, he said quietly. Can they? I want to believe that. I need to believe that. But I don't know how to be someone different when the entire system rewards being exactly who I was. Then maybe the system needs to change too. Lauren laughed, but there was no humor in it. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's not impossible either. You have power, real power. You could use it differently. By doing what? Suddenly becoming warm and fuzzy? My board would replace me in a week. I'm not talking about being warm and fuzzy. I'm talking about remembering that the people who work for you are people, that efficiency metrics don't capture human dignity, that the janitor cleaning your floors at night has a name and a daughter and medical bills and dreams that matter just as much as yours do. The words came out harder than he'd intended, carrying 3 years of swallowed frustration. But Lauren didn't flinch. You're right, she said simply. You're absolutely right. And I don't know how to fix it, but I have to try. For Emma. She's 7 years old and she already knows that most people don't help. That's what I'm teaching her, that the world is divided into people who matter and people who don't. I can't let that be her inheritance. They sat in silence for a moment, watching their daughters. Emma was laughing at something Mia had said, the sound bright and clear and completely normal. A week ago she'd been dying. Now she was laughing. The distance between those two realities felt impossibly vast. I transferred you to day shift, Lauren said abruptly. Tom probably told you. I didn't ask permission, just made it happen. I know it's not enough. It doesn't come close to being enough. But I thought you should be home with your daughter after school. If that's overstepping, I can reverse it. It's not overstepping. Thank you. I also want to set up a trust fund for Mia's medical expenses. Emma's treatment has made me very aware of how expensive healthcare is, and I know juvenile arthritis requires ongoing management. Let me help. No. The word came out flat and immediate. Lauren looked startled. Why not? I can afford it, and I don't want your money. I want you to understand why I don't want your money. Ethan leaned forward, keeping his voice low but firm. You can't buy absolution. You can't write a check and make the guilt go away. If you want to actually make amends, if you want to actually change things, then change the system that made you think people like me were disposable in the first place. Pay every single parent in your company a living wage. Give them health care that actually covers their kids. Create policies that let them be present in their children's lives. Do that, and you'll help 100 kids like Mia. But don't single me out for special treatment because I happen to have the right blood type. The words landed between them like a challenge. Lauren's face went through several expressions before settling into something like respect. You're angry with me. I was angry with you. Now I'm just tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of watching people like you make decisions that hurt people like me without even noticing. Tired of a world where my daughter asked me, can we help? And I almost said no because I was too exhausted from surviving to have anything left over for kindness. But you said yes anyway, because that's who I want to be. That's who I want Mia to see when she looks at me. Not someone who's been ground down so far that he can't see past his own suffering. Lauren was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was different, softer, but with something steel-hard underneath. Okay, no trust fund for Mia specifically, but I want you to help me. Help you with what? Fixing it. The system. You said I have power. You're right. And you said people like you are invisible to people like me. You're also right. So help me see. Consult with me on restructuring company policies. Show me what needs to change and how to change it. Let me pay you properly for that work, not as charity, but as the expert consultation it is. Ethan stared at her. I'm a janitor. You're a former aerospace engineer who's been managing impossible financial calculations for 3 years while raising a daughter alone and somehow still finding the capacity for kindness. Don't minimize what you are. How did you know I was an engineer? I looked you up after the hospital, read everything I could find. Your patents are impressive. The papers you published on stress distribution in composite materials are still cited in current research. You walked away from all of that to take care of your wife and daughter. Her expression was complicated. I called that carelessness. I called you just maintenance. I had no idea who I was talking to. It shouldn't matter who I was. It should only matter that I'm a person who deserves basic respect. You're right, again. But my point stands. You have expertise I need, real expertise, both technical and human. Help me restructure company policies to actually support people instead of just extracting maximum productivity from them. Consult on it. Let me pay you what that expertise is worth. It was manipulation, probably. A way for Lauren to feel like she was doing something meaningful while still maintaining control. But it was also an opportunity, a chance to actually change things for people like him. People who worked in the shadows, keeping everything running while being treated as interchangeable parts. I'll think about it, Ethan said finally. That's all I'm asking. The girls returned then, Emma moving carefully but with more energy than when they'd arrived. She was clutching Charlotte's web like treasure. Mom, can Mia come over sometime? She said she'd show me the exercises she does for her arthritis because my physical therapist is boring. Lauren glanced at Ethan, asking permission without words. He nodded slightly. I think that could be arranged, Lauren said. If it's okay with me as dad. It's okay with me, Ethan said, looking at his daughter. If Mia wants to. I want to. Mia's enthusiasm was genuine. Emma's really nice. They exchanged phone numbers, made vague plans to coordinate schedules, said goodbyes that felt both normal and surreal. As Ethan and Mia walked back through the park, Mia slipped her hand into his. I like Emma. She's smart, and she asks good questions. I'm glad you made a friend. Is her mom still mean? Ethan considered the question carefully. I think she's trying not to be. That's all anyone can do. Try to be better than they were. Like you with the blood. You were tired, but you tried anyway. Yeah, baby, like that. That night, after Mia was asleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, the 7-year-old machine that took 3 minutes to boot up, but still functioned for basic tasks. He hadn't opened his engineering files in almost 3 years. Hadn't let himself think about the career he'd abandoned because thinking about it hurt too much. But now he clicked through old folders, looking at his research, his calculations, his patents, looking at who he used to be. The work was still good, solid, the kind of problem solving that came from understanding complex systems and finding elegant solutions. And wasn't that exactly what Lauren was asking for? Someone who could look at the complex system of a corporation and find solutions that worked for everyone, not just the people at the top? His phone buzzed. A message from Lauren. "Thank you for today. Emma hasn't stopped talking about Mia. And thank you for being honest with me. I need that more than I need absolution." He typed back, "I'll help you, but I have conditions." Her response was immediate. Name them. 1. Any policies we develop apply to everyone, not just our specific situations. 2. I maintain my night job while we work on this. I need the stability, and I need to stay connected to the people these changes will affect. 3. You actually implement what we develop even if your board pushes back. No performative gestures. The reply took longer this time. Agreed. All 3. When can you start? Monday. After my shift ends at 2 p.m., I'll clear my schedule. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. He set the phone down and looked around his small kitchen, the bills still stacked on the counter, the cheap appliances, the scuffed linoleum that no amount of cleaning could make look new. In a week, his life had cracked open in ways he couldn't have predicted. The invisible man had become visible, and visibility came with complications he hadn't asked for and opportunities he didn't entirely trust. But Mia was sleeping peacefully in the next room, dreaming whatever dreams came to 9-year-old girls who believed the world could be kind if people just tried. And somewhere across town, Emma Whitmore was probably doing the same thing, clutching a secondhand copy of Charlotte's Web and believing that strangers could become friends. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that small exchange of kindness, his blood for her life, Mia's book for Emma's recovery, could ripple outward into something bigger. Or maybe it would all collapse under the weight of good intentions, meeting institutional inertia. Either way, Ethan had made his choice. He'd said yes to helping, the same way he'd said yes in the hospital. Not because he expected it to fix everything, or because he thought Lauren Whitmore would magically transform into someone different, but because Mia was watching, learning what it meant to move through the world with integrity. And because somewhere in the past 3 years of being invisible, he'd forgotten that he used to be someone who solved impossible problems. Maybe it was time to remember. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Ethan completed his day shift with the same methodical efficiency he always brought to the work, but his mind was elsewhere, thinking about systems and policies and how you changed a culture that had calcified around certain assumptions about who mattered and who didn't. At 2:15, he found himself in the elevator heading up to the executive floor, this time with permission and purpose instead of a mop and bucket. Lauren's assistant, a young woman named Kayla, who'd been one of the ones who stepped around him without seeing him for 3 years, did a double take when he introduced himself. "Mr. Cole, for the 2:30 meeting?" "That's right." She recovered quickly, professional smile sliding into place. "Ms. Whitmore is expecting you. Conference room B." The conference room was smaller than the main boardroom, with glass walls that made everything visible. Lauren was already there, along with someone Ethan didn't recognize, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a tablet full of notes. "Ethan, thank you for coming. This is Margaret Chen, our VP of Human Resources. I brought her in because any policy changes we develop will need to go through her department." Margaret extended her hand with a directness Ethan appreciated. "Mr. Cole, Lawrence told me about the work you'll be doing with us. I'll be honest, I'm skeptical that one consultant can change 15 years of corporate culture, but I'm willing to be proven wrong." "I appreciate the honesty," Ethan said, shaking her hand. "And I'm skeptical too, but we won't know unless we try." They sat, and Lauren pulled up a presentation on the screen. "I've been reviewing our current policies on parental leave, healthcare coverage, scheduling flexibility, and wage structures. The data is pretty damning." She wasn't wrong. The slides showed statistics that Ethan recognized from living them. Inadequate sick leave that forced people to choose between caring for ill children and keeping their jobs. Healthcare plans with deductibles so high they were effectively useless for low-wage workers. Scheduling practices that made childcare nearly impossible for single parents. All of it legal. All of it common. All of it devastating for the people trying to survive it. These are industry standard, Margaret noted, which means changing them puts us at a competitive disadvantage. Or it puts us at a competitive advantage, Ethan countered. How much does employee turnover cost? How much productivity do you lose when people are exhausted from juggling impossible schedules? How much talent never applies because they know the policies won't support their reality? Margaret's expression shifted slightly. Those are hard costs to quantify. So are human dignity and employee loyalty, but that doesn't make them less real. They worked through the afternoon, Ethan drawing on his engineering background to map out systems and dependencies, showing how changes in one area would ripple through others. He talked about his coworkers, Rosa, who watched Mia for almost nothing because daycare cost more than she could earn, Tom, who'd been managing facilities for 12 years and still couldn't afford his wife's cancer treatments, Maria, who cleaned the third floor and sometimes slept in her car between shifts because she couldn't afford rent and also send money to her family. Lauren listened with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable, taking notes, asking questions, pushing back when his suggestions seemed unrealistic, and then working with him to find solutions that might actually function. Margaret remained skeptical but engaged, pointing out legal requirements and budget constraints while grudgingly admitting that some of his ideas had merit. By 5 p.m., they'd outlined the skeleton of something that might work, a comprehensive policy overhaul that would cost money up front but potentially save it long-term through reduced turnover and increased productivity. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough, but it was more than Ethan had expected to accomplish in 3 hours. "This is good?" Lauren said finally. "Really good. Margaret, can you cost this out and bring it to next week's executive meeting?" "I can, but you know Richardson is going to fight you on this. The board chair doesn't like expenses that don't show immediate ROI." "Then I'll make the case for long-term ROI. We're doing this." After Margaret left, Lauren turned to Ethan. "Thank you. I know this isn't easy, coming into a space where you've been invisible and suddenly being asked to be visible in a very specific way. It's strange," Ethan admitted, "but it feels important." "It is important, and Ethan, I meant what I said about implementing this. Whatever resistance I get, we're seeing this through." He wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that one near-death experience and a crisis of conscience could actually change decades of ingrained behavior. But he'd been disappointed too many times to accept promises at face value. "I'll believe it when I see it implemented," he said. Lauren nodded, accepting the skepticism as earned. "Fair enough. Same time next week?" "Same time next week." The resistance came faster than expected. 3 days after their first policy meeting, Ethan arrived for his regular shift to find Tom waiting by the time clock with an expression that telegraphed bad news from across the room. "Corporate sent down new efficiency protocols this morning," Tom said without preamble. "They're cutting night crew by another 15%. Orders came from the board, override from someone named Richardson." Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. "When?" "End of the month. I've got to let 3 people go." Tom's jaw was tight. "Been doing this job 12 years and I still hate this part. These are good workers, Cole. People with families." "Does Lauren Whitmore know?" "If she does, she didn't stop it." Tom studied him. "You've been meeting with her, right? Working on some kind of consulting project?" Word traveled fast in the invisible world. Ethan shouldn't have been surprised that his coworkers had noticed his elevator trips to the executive floor. "Yeah, we're developing new policies, better ones." "Well, whatever you're developing isn't moving fast enough. Richardson's cuts are happening now." Tom handed him a clipboard. "Need you to deep clean the boardroom tonight. They've got a big presentation tomorrow and want it perfect." The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. While he and Lauren sketched plans for a more humane workplace, the actual workplace was getting measurably worse for the people who needed help most. He took the clipboard and headed for the supply closet, anger building with each step. By midnight, the executive floor was empty except for him and the hum of expensive electronics. Ethan cleaned the boardroom with methodical precision, letting the repetitive work burn off some of the frustration. But when he finished vacuuming and started wiping down the massive mahogany conference table, he noticed something. A folder left behind marked Board Meeting Agenda, Confidential. He shouldn't look. It was none of his business. Except it absolutely was his business, because whatever was in that folder would directly impact people like him, people whose livelihoods were line items on spreadsheets reviewed by men who'd never pushed a mop or worried about choosing between electricity and groceries. Ethan opened the folder. The agenda was dense with corporate language, but certain items jumped out. Employee cost reduction targets, facilities budget cuts, opposition to proposed policy expansions that compromise competitive positioning. And there, in black and white, a note from Richardson to the board. Whitmore's recent policy proposals represent fiscal irresponsibility driven by personal guilt rather than sound business judgment. Recommend limiting her authority over HR and operations decisions. They were going to sideline Lauren before she could implement anything meaningful. The realization hit Ethan like a physical blow. All the work they'd done, all the careful planning and system mapping, it was going to die in this boardroom tomorrow while he cleaned up the coffee cups afterward. He pulled out his phone and photographed the relevant pages, then carefully returned the folder to exactly where he'd found it. The photos were insurance, maybe. Or evidence. Or just confirmation that the game was rigged and always had been. His phone buzzed before he could overthink it. A text from Lauren. "Are you still in the building? Can you come to my office?" It was 12:30 in the morning. Executives didn't work this late unless something was wrong. Ethan packed up his cleaning supplies and took the elevator down 2 floors to the executive suite. Lauren's office light was visible through the glass walls, the only illuminated space on the entire floor. She was at her desk, still in work clothes but looking disheveled in a way he'd never seen, hair escaping its usual tight control, jacket discarded, exhaustion written across her face. "You're here late," Ethan said from the doorway. She looked up, and he saw she'd been crying. Not much, just enough to leave her eyes red and her composure fractured. "I just got off a 3-hour call with the board. Richardson's blocking the policy changes. Not just blocking, actively working to undercut my authority over personnel decisions." Her voice was flat with defeat. "He's calling an emergency vote tomorrow to limit my operational control. Says I've become too emotionally compromised to make sound business decisions." "I know, I saw the agenda." Her eyes widened. "How?" "I was cleaning the boardroom. Someone left the folder." He pulled out his phone, showed her the photos. "They're planning to cut another 15% from night crew. That's 3 people losing their jobs while we sit in meetings talking about helping them." Lauren stared at the photos, her expression cycling through shock, anger, and something that looked like despair. "I told Richardson I wouldn't approve those cuts. He went around me directly to the board." "Can he do that?" "Technically, yes. The board has ultimate authority. I'm CEO, but I serve at their pleasure, and if enough of them decide I'm compromised..." She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Ethan sat down across from her, uninvited, but past caring about protocol. "So, what are you going to do?" "I don't know. Fight, probably. Lose, probably." She laughed, but it was bitter. "You warned me about this. You said the system rewards being exactly who I was, and you were right. The moment I try to be something different, the system punishes it." "You're giving up?" "I'm being realistic. Richardson has the votes. He's been building opposition to me for months. This situation with Emma just gave him the excuse he needed. By tomorrow afternoon, I'll be a figurehead with no real power, and Richardson will be making all the operational decisions." She met his eyes. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I promised you we'd implement these changes, and I'm going to fail." The defeat in her voice sparked something in Ethan. Not sympathy, but anger. Anger at the waste of it, at the system that made kindness a liability, at the fact that the moment someone with power tried to use it differently, they got kneecapped by people invested in maintaining the status quo. "You're not a figurehead yet," he said. "The vote is tomorrow afternoon? 2 p.m. Then you have until 2 p.m. tomorrow to make this count. Stop playing by their rules, Lauren. They're going to take your power anyway. Use it while you still have it." She looked at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. "Use it how? I can't implement policy changes without board approval. I can't stop the cuts without their sign-off." "What exactly do you think I can do in 18 hours? Make noise. Make it public. Make it impossible for them to quietly bury this." The idea was forming as he spoke, reckless and probably stupid, but also maybe the only play they had. "You've got media contacts, right? Industry connections. Call them. Tell them everything. The policy proposals, Richardson's opposition, the cuts happening while we're sitting on record profits. Make it a story about corporate values and labor practices. Force the board to have this conversation publicly instead of in a private boardroom. That's career suicide. I'd be violating confidentiality agreements, undermining board authority. They're already taking your authority. The only question is whether you go quietly or whether you use your platform while you still have one to say something that matters. Lauren was quiet for a long moment, and Ethan could see her war with herself, the trained executive who'd spent 15 years playing the game correctly versus the mother who'd watched her daughter almost die and realized the game was broken. I'd lose everything, she said finally. My position, my reputation, probably any chance of working in this industry again. Yeah, probably. But 3 weeks ago you were willing to sacrifice your daughter's life rather than be late to a meeting. Now you're willing to sacrifice your career to maybe help the people who work for you. That's progress. She flinched at the harshness of it, but didn't argue. What about you? If I go public with this and your photos of the confidential agenda get mentioned, you'll lose your job too. I'm one of the 3 people getting cut anyway, Ethan said. Tom hasn't told me yet, but the math isn't complicated. I've got the least seniority on night crew. I was dead the moment Richardson sent down those orders. You don't know that. I know exactly that. I've been watching this game from the bottom for 3 years, Lauren. I know how it works. The only difference is whether I lose my job quietly or whether we make enough noise that maybe something actually changes for the people who come after me. She stood abruptly, paced to the window overlooking the parking lot where Ethan's ancient Honda sat next to her Mercedes, like a visual metaphor for everything wrong with the current system. Her reflection in the glass showed someone struggling with a decision that would define her. If I do this, she said slowly, I need you with me, not just the photos. I need you willing to go on record about working conditions, about the impact of these policies on actual people. I can talk about numbers and efficiency metrics all day, but that's abstract. You make it real. You want me to be the face of this, the struggling single dad who donated blood and then got fired? I want you to be honest about what it's actually like to work here. That's all. But yes, it would help if people understood the human cost of Richardson's efficiency targets. Ethan thought about Mia, about the questions she'd ask when he had to explain why he lost his job. He thought about the other night workers, Maria and Tom, and all the others who'd be watching to see if speaking up made any difference, or just made you unemployable. He thought about the fact that staying silent had kept him safe but invisible for 3 years, and visibility had brought nothing but complications. But he also thought about Mia asking, "Can we help?" and the simple belief that the right thing to do was help when help was needed. "Okay," he said. "I'm in. What's the plan?" They worked through the night, Lauren making calls to journalists she knew, Ethan drafting a statement about working conditions that was honest without being inflammatory. By 4 a.m., they had commitments from 2 business reporters and 1 labor advocacy organization to cover the story. By 6 a.m., Lauren had written and scheduled a company-wide email that would go out at 9, outlining the proposed policy changes and Richardson's opposition to them. "This is insane," Lauren said, reviewing the email one final time. "This violates every rule of corporate communication I've ever learned." "Good. The rules are designed to protect people like Richardson, not people like me." She hit send on the scheduled message, then sat back. "There. It's done. In 3 hours, every employee in this company will know exactly what's happening. Richardson will be furious. Let him be furious. Fury is better than indifference." Ethan went home as dawn broke, caught 2 hours of sleep, and woke to his phone exploding with messages. The company-wide email had gone out exactly as scheduled. The business reporters had posted articles. Social media was picking up the story. And somewhere in corporate headquarters, Richardson was presumably losing his mind. Tom called at 10 a.m. "Cole, what the hell did you do?" "What do you mean?" "I mean my phone's been ringing off the hook with corporate asking about night crew conditions. I mean there are reporters calling asking for interviews. I mean Richardson just sent out an email calling Whitmore's message reckless insubordination and threatening legal action against anyone who speaks to the press." Tom paused. "Please tell me you didn't do anything stupid. Define stupid." Oh, for the love of Cole, this is your job we're talking about. Whatever crusade Whitmore's on, you don't have to be her sacrifice. It's not a crusade, Tom. It's just telling the truth about how things actually work here. The truth gets people fired. I was getting fired anyway. This way, maybe it means something. Tom was quiet for a long moment. The reporters want to talk to actual employees, anonymous sources about what it's like working here. I can't tell people what to do, but give them my number. I'll talk on the record. Jesus, Cole, you're really doing this. Yeah, I really am. The reporter called within an hour. A woman named Jennifer Martinez, who'd been covering labor issues for 15 years and had the kind of direct questioning style that suggested she'd heard every corporate euphemism and wasn't buying any of them. Mr. Cole, can you describe your current working conditions at Whitmore Pharmaceuticals? Ethan told her. Not with anger or exaggeration, just the facts of his life. The wages that didn't cover basic expenses, the healthcare that left him drowning in debt from his daughter's medical needs, the scheduling that made being a present parent nearly impossible, the casual invisibility of people who did essential work for a company posting record profits. He told her about being publicly humiliated by the CEO and then saving that CEO's daughter's life hours later. He told her about the proposed policy changes that could actually help and the board member blocking them to preserve profit margins. And you're aware you'll likely lose your job over this interview? Jennifer asked. I'm aware. But my daughter's 9 years old, and she's watching how I move through the world. I can teach her that you stay quiet and safe, or I can teach her that sometimes you speak up even when it costs you. I'd rather teach her the second thing. The article went live at 2 p.m., exactly when Richardson's board vote was scheduled to start. By 2:30, it had been shared 10,000 times. By 3, other news outlets were picking it up. By 4, Whitmore Pharmaceuticals was trending on social media, and not in a good way. Ethan's phone rang. Lauren, her voice tight with stress and something that might have been exhilaration. The vote's been postponed. Richardson's so busy doing damage control he can't push his agenda. The board wants a full investigation into labor practices before they make any personnel decisions. She laughed, slightly wild. We didn't win, but we didn't lose either. We bought time. What happens now? Now we use that time. I've got 3 board members who are on the fence but are spooked by the publicity. If we can show them there's a business case for treating people better, actual data, not just moral arguments, we might have a chance. That's a big if. It's the only if we've got. Can you come in tomorrow? We need to put together a presentation that makes the economic case airtight. Ethan looked around his apartment. The bills still on the counter, Mia's homework scattered on the table, the life he'd built through sheer determination that was now balanced on a knife's edge. Going in tomorrow meant doubling down on this fight. It meant visibility, risk, the possibility of catastrophic failure. It also meant maybe, just maybe, the chance to change something real. I'll be there, he said. That evening, he picked Mia up from school, and they walked to the park together. She'd been quiet since he'd explained that his job situation was complicated right now, processing it with the serious expression she got when trying to understand adult problems. Are we going to be okay? She asked finally. Ethan sat on a bench and pulled her close. Honestly, I don't know, baby. Things might be hard for a while, but we've been through hard before and we made it through. We'll make it through this too. Because you helped Emma. Because I helped Emma, and because sometimes doing the right thing is more important than doing the safe thing. Mia was quiet then. Mom would be proud of you. The words hit Ethan like a fist to the chest. He hadn't talked about Sarah much lately, trying to protect Mia from the weight of that loss, but his daughter was right. Sarah would have been proud. Sarah had always believed in fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves, had always chosen integrity over convenience, even when it cost them. This whole mess was exactly the kind of thing she would have walked into eyes open, consequences be damned. Yeah, he said, voice rough. She would be. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Maria from third floor cleaning crew. Tom gave me your number. Wanted you to know some of us are talking to reporters too. You were brave to go first. Thank you. Then another message from someone named James in maintenance. Then Rosa, saying she was proud of him. Then others, people he'd worked alongside for years, all of them saying versions of the same thing. Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for making us visible. Thank you for giving us a voice. Ethan stared at the messages, overwhelmed. He'd thought he was making a reckless individual choice. But apparently that choice had given other people permission to make their own choices, to step out of the shadows and say their experiences mattered. It was small, probably fragile, definitely not guaranteed to last. But it was something. The next morning, he met Lauren in a different conference room, smaller, more private, with Margaret Chen already there, along with someone Ethan didn't recognize. A man in his 60s with sharp eyes and the weathered confidence of someone who'd seen everything twice. Ethan Cole, this is David Park, Lauren said. He's been on our board for 8 years and he's agreed to hear us out before the next vote. David extended his hand. Mr. Cole, I've read the articles. Interesting perspective you brought to light. Just the truth, sir. Truth tends to be interesting. David sat, gestured for them to do the same. I'll be direct. Richardson has the votes to limit Lauren's authority. That's happening. The question is whether he also has the votes to push through his cost-cutting measures. I'm on the fence about that, which is why I'm here. Convince me there's a business case for your proposed policies. They spent 3 hours doing exactly that. Ethan talked about turnover costs and institutional knowledge loss. Margaret presented data on productivity metrics and employee satisfaction scores. Lauren walked through financial projections showing that investing in workforce stability actually saved money over a 5-year horizon when you accounted for training costs, recruitment expenses, and the hidden costs of low morale. David listened without interrupting, taking notes, occasionally asking sharp questions that cut straight to the weaknesses in their arguments. When they finished, he sat back and studied them. Here's my problem, he said finally. Everything you're showing me makes sense on paper, but it requires us to value things that don't show up on quarterly earnings reports. It requires faith that treating people better will eventually translate to better business outcomes. And in my experience, faith and business are uncomfortable bedfellows. It's not faith, Ethan said. It's pattern recognition. Companies with better labor practices have lower turnover. Lower turnover means lower costs. The data's there if you're willing to look past next quarter's numbers. You sound like an engineer, Mr. Cole. I was an engineer before I became invisible. David's eyes sharpened. Explain that. So Ethan did. He talked about walking away from his career to care for his dying wife, about the medical debt that had swallowed their savings, about becoming a janitor because it was the only job with hours that let him be present for his daughter. He talked about 3 years of being walked past, talked over, treated as part of the building rather than as a person. And he talked about how that invisibility wasn't unique to him. It was the default experience for everyone who did essential work for wages that didn't cover essentials. The people cleaning your offices at night have names and families and talents you never see because you've decided they're not worth seeing, Ethan said. Not because they're not valuable, but because the system is designed to extract their labor while minimizing their humanity. You want a business case? Here it is. You're wasting human capital by treating people as disposable. You're losing productivity and institutional knowledge and potential innovation because you've created a culture where entire classes of workers are invisible. Fix that, and you don't just get better morale. You get better outcomes. The room was quiet when he finished. David was watching him with an unreadable expression. You're asking us to fundamentally rethink how we value labor, David said finally. I'm asking you to value it at all. David stood, gathered his papers. I'll need to think about this. I'll have an answer before the next board meeting. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, Mr. Cole, you're not invisible anymore. Whether that's good or bad remains to be seen, but you've definitely been seen. After he left, Lauren collapsed into her chair. I can't tell if that went well or terribly. Neither can I, Ethan admitted, but at least he listened. He listened because you were there, because you made it real instead of abstract. She looked at him. Thank you. Whatever happens, thank you for fighting. We haven't won yet. No, but we haven't lost either, and sometimes that's enough to keep going. Ethan went home that afternoon uncertain about everything except one thing. He'd made a choice to be visible, and there was no going back to invisibility now. Whatever came next, He'd face it the same way he'd faced everything for the past 3 years. One day at a time, one decision at a time, trying to be the man his daughter could be proud of. The next evening, Mia had a playdate with Emma at the Whitmore house, a sprawling place in a neighborhood where Ethan's entire year's salary probably wouldn't cover the property taxes. He walked Mia to the door, prepared to drop her off and leave, but Emma answered with such genuine excitement that his heart ached. "Mia, I finished Charlotte's Web, and it made me cry, but in a good way. Come see my room!" The girls disappeared upstairs, and Lauren appeared in the doorway. "Come in. I made coffee." They sat in her kitchen, all marble and expensive appliances, the kind of space that probably had a designer's name attached, and drank coffee that tasted better than anything Ethan could afford. "David called me this morning," Lauren said. "He's bringing a proposal to the board, a compromise position that implements some of our policy changes in a pilot program. Not everything we wanted, but more than I thought we'd get. That's good news. It's contingent on me accepting a reduced operational role. Richardson gets oversight on facilities and HR decisions for the next year." Ethan felt the floor drop out. "So you lose anyway?" "I lose power, but the policies move forward. Isn't that what matters?" "Is it? If Richardson has oversight, he'll just undermine everything." "Not if there's public accountability. Not if we've created enough attention that he has to be careful about how he operates." Lauren set down her coffee cup. "I'm not naive enough to think this is a complete victory, but it's progress, real progress. And it happened because you refused to stay invisible." Upstairs, they could hear the girls laughing. Two children from completely different worlds, connected by an emergency that had forced their fathers to see each other as human. It was fragile and improbable, and maybe not enough to sustain lasting change, but it was something. "What happens to you now?" Lauren asked. "With your job?" "I don't know. Tom hasn't officially told me I'm being cut, but I'm not holding my breath." "I could protect your position?" "No." Ethan's voice was firm. "No special treatment. If the pilot program works, if policies actually change, then jobs like mine will be stable for everyone. That's what matters. Not whether I specifically keep my job, but whether the job itself becomes sustainable." Lauren studied him. "You really mean that?" "I really mean that. This was never about me, Lauren. It was about the system, about making it work for people instead of against them." She nodded slowly. "You're a better person than I am. I'm just a person who's been on the receiving end long enough to know what needs to change." They sat in silence for a moment, two people from opposite sides of an invisible wall that had briefly, improbably, become permeable. It wouldn't last. Ethan knew that. The world would reassert itself, power structures would calcify again, and whatever changes they'd managed would be eroded by the constant pressure of people like Richardson, who believed efficiency mattered more than humanity. But for now, in this moment, his daughter was laughing with a girl who'd almost died, and maybe that small connection was worth all the risk and uncertainty and potential loss that had brought them here. The girls came downstairs eventually, Mia carrying a new book Emma had insisted she borrow. They said their goodbyes with plans to meet at the park again soon, and Ethan drove home with Mia chattering about Emma's collection of books and her cool room and how nice it was to have a friend who understood about doctors and being sick sometimes. "I like that we helped her," Mia said as they pulled into their apartment complex. "Even if things are hard now, I'm glad we helped." Ethan looked at his daughter, 9 years old and already understanding things about sacrifice and principle that some people never learned. "Me too, baby," he said. "Me too." The call came on Thursday morning, 3 days before the board's final vote. Ethan was making breakfast for Mia, scrambled eggs and toast, the same meal they'd eaten 1,000 mornings because it was cheap and filling and she never complained, when his phone lit up with Tom's name. He knew before answering that this was the conversation he'd been waiting for, the one where his employment status shifted from uncertain to definitively over. Cole. Tom's voice was heavy with the weight of a job he hated doing. "I need you to come in early today. Richardson wants to see you at 9 a.m. "He's firing me personally?" "I don't know what he's doing, but it's not good, Ethan. Whatever happens in that meeting, keep your head down and don't give him ammunition." After Tom hung up, Ethan sat at the kitchen table watching Mia eat her eggs while reading a book propped against her juice glass. She looked up, caught his expression. "You okay, Daddy?" He made himself smile. "Just thinking about work stuff." Nothing for you to worry about. Is it because of the news articles? She was too perceptive for her own good, or maybe just too familiar with watching him navigate problems he tried to shield her from. Maybe. But whatever happens, we'll be okay. We always figure it out, right? Right. But her voice was small, uncertain in a way that made his chest tight. He dropped her at school with an extra-long hug, then drove to Whitmore Pharmaceuticals with the strange calm that came from knowing the worst was probably about to happen and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The building looked the same as always, gleaming glass and steel, the physical manifestation of corporate success built on the backs of people whose names would never appear in the annual report. Richardson's office was on the top floor, a space Ethan had cleaned dozens of times but never entered as anything other than maintenance. The assistant who greeted him, young, nervous, clearly uncomfortable with whatever was about to happen, gestured to a chair outside the closed door. "Mr. Richardson is finishing a call. He'll see you in a few minutes." Ethan sat, watching executives and assistants move past with the purposeful stride of people who belonged here. None of them looked at him. He'd been briefly visible, but visibility was exhausting to maintain, and the world had a way of reasserting comfortable patterns. He was already fading back into the walls. The door opened. Richardson stood there, 60 years old and radiating the particular arrogance that came from decades of unchallenged authority. He didn't invite Ethan in, just stood in the doorway like a barrier. "Cole, I'll keep this brief. You're terminated effective immediately for violation of company confidentiality policies. You photographed privileged board materials and shared them with media outlets. We have security footage of you in the boardroom that night, and the timestamps match when those photos were taken." Ethan had known this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud still landed like a punch. "I was cleaning the boardroom. The folder was left out. And you chose to photograph it and leak it to the press. That's theft of proprietary information." Richardson's smile was cold. "Your termination is with cause, which means no severance, no unemployment benefits, and a permanent flag on your employment record. Good luck finding another job in this industry. You're cutting 15% of night crew to preserve profit margins while posting record earnings. That's not proprietary information. That's information the public has a right to know. The public has no rights regarding internal corporate decisions. You, however, had a legal obligation to maintain confidentiality. You violated that obligation." Richardson pulled out a document. "This is your termination paperwork. Sign it and leave your badge and keys with security on your way out. You have 30 minutes to clear any personal items from your locker." Ethan took the paperwork, scanned it quickly. It was exactly as Richardson had described. Termination with cause, no benefits, a legal waiver that would prevent him from suing for wrongful termination. Signing it meant accepting that the past 3 years of his labor had been reduced to a security breach and a cautionary tale. What if I don't sign? Then we pursue legal action for theft of corporate property and industrial espionage. I have lawyers who bill $800 an hour and unlimited motivation to make you an example. You have, what, maybe enough saved to hire a public defender? Richardson's expression was genuinely amused. "Sign the paper, Cole. Accept that you gambled on being a hero and lost. Go find another job mopping floors somewhere that doesn't require references." The cruelty of it was almost impressive in its efficiency. Richardson had found the exact pressure point, Ethan's inability to afford a legal fight, and applied it with surgical precision. Fighting meant risking everything for a principal that wouldn't pay Mia's medical bills or keep a roof over their heads. Signing meant swallowing the injustice and moving on. Ethan thought about Sarah, about the conversations they used to have about integrity and what it cost. She'd always believed that doing the right thing was its own reward, that you couldn't put a price on self-respect. But Sarah had never had to choose between self-respect and feeding their daughter. He picked up the pen, then stopped. "If I sign this, what happens to the other employees who spoke to the press? They're being handled separately, not your concern." "It is my concern. I went on record first. I gave them permission to speak up. If they're being punished for following my example, then they made poor choices based on your poor judgment. Sign the paper, Cole. I have a meeting in 10 minutes and you're wasting my time." Ethan set down the pen. "No." Richardson's amusement evaporated. "Excuse me? I'm not signing. If you want to fire me, fire me. But I'm not agreeing that I did anything wrong by telling the truth about working conditions here. Take me to court if you want. Spend $800 an hour explaining to a judge why photographing evidence of labor exploitation is the same as industrial espionage. Make it public. Make it loud. See how that plays with the reporters who are already watching this company. You're bluffing. You can't afford a legal fight. You're right, I can't. But I also can't afford to teach my daughter that you stay silent when you witness injustice because fighting is too expensive. So yeah, I'm probably going to lose everything. But you're going to have to actually take it from me instead of getting me to hand it over voluntarily. For the first time, Richardson looked genuinely angry instead of smugly amused. You self-righteous, you think you're making some noble stand? You're a janitor who overstepped and is about to learn a very expensive lesson about knowing your place. My place. Ethan stood, meeting Richardson's eyes directly. My place is exactly where I've been for 3 years, keeping this building running while people like you make decisions about efficiency without having to see the human cost. My place is donating double blood units to save a 7-year-old girl while her mother realizes she'd been treating me like I wasn't fully human. My place is standing here refusing to sign your paper because somebody has to stand up and say this system is broken and needs to change. Your heroic speech doesn't change reality. You're fired. Security will escort you out. Fine, but I'm not signing. Richardson's face went red. You'll regret this. I will personally ensure you never work in this city again. I will make your life so legally complicated you'll wish you'd taken the termination. Maybe. But at least I'll be able to look my daughter in the eye and tell her I didn't back down when it mattered. Richardson slammed the door in his face. Through the glass wall, Ethan could see him on the phone, gesturing angrily. Security would be here soon. His 30 minutes to collect personal items had just become however long it took them to arrive. He headed for the service elevator, his mind racing through immediate logistics. No job meant no income. No income meant they'd burn through his pathetic savings in maybe 6 weeks if he was careful. The rent increase was due in 2 weeks. Mia had a doctor's appointment next month that his now canceled insurance wouldn't cover. The math was impossible and getting more impossible by the second. The elevator doors opened and Lauren stepped out, nearly colliding with him. She took one look at his face and understood. Richardson fired you. Tried to. I wouldn't sign his termination agreement. Ethan, that's... She stopped herself. Come to my office, now. I don't think I'm allowed to be here anymore. You're allowed anywhere I say you're allowed. Come on. Her office was 2 floors down and she closed the door firmly behind them before turning to face him. Richardson called me 5 minutes ago, absolutely furious that you refused to sign. He wants me to back him up in taking legal action against you. Are you going to? What? No, of course not. But Ethan, refusing to sign was incredibly risky. He can make your life very difficult. He was already making my life difficult. At least this way, I didn't collaborate in my own destruction. Lauren sat heavily in her desk chair. I should have protected you better. Should have seen this coming and found a way to shield you from retaliation. This isn't your fault. I made my choices knowing the risks. Choices you made because I asked for your help. Because I dragged you into this fight and now you're paying the price while I still have my office and my salary and my ability to absorb the consequences. She looked up at him. Let me help. I have lawyers on retainer who are very good at employment law. I can pay for your legal defense. No. Ethan, we already had this conversation, remember? You can't buy absolution, and you definitely can't buy it by turning me into your charity case while Richardson grinds me into the dirt. Then what? You just accept losing everything? I accept that standing up for what's right sometimes costs more than you want to pay. I accept that I don't have good options, only less bad ones. And I accept that if I'd stayed silent and invisible, I'd still have my job and Mia would still have stability, but I'd also be the man who taught his daughter that safety matters more than integrity. Lauren was quiet for a long moment. Sarah would be proud of you. The way you talk about her, she sounds like she was someone who believed in fighting for things that mattered. She was, and she'd also tell me I'm an idiot for not taking your help when it's offered. She was principled, but she wasn't stupid. Ethan managed a tired smile. But I need to do this my way. Not because I don't trust you, but because I need to know I can stand on my own. Even if standing on your own means falling? Even then. His phone buzzed, a text from Tom. Security is looking for you. Whatever you're doing, do it fast. Lauren saw it too. I can stall them. Give you time to eat. To what? Hide in your office? I'm done hiding, Lauren. Done being invisible, done pretending the system works if you just keep your head down and don't make waves. He headed for the door, then paused. The board vote is in 2 days. Whatever happens with Richardson's legal threats, don't let him kill the pilot program. That matters more than whether I specifically survive this. You matter too, Ethan. Yeah, but I'm one person. The pilot program could help hundreds, thousands, if other companies see it working and follow the model. Keep fighting for that, please. She nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. I will. I promise. Security met him in the lobby. 2 guards he'd worked alongside for years, both looking uncomfortable with their assignment. The older one, Marcus, had always been decent to him. Sorry about this, Cole. Orders are orders. I know. It's okay. They escorted him to his locker, watched while he collected the few personal items he kept there. A photo of Mia, a spare jacket, the thermos Sarah had given him 8 years ago that still worked perfectly. It took less than 5 minutes to erase 3 years of his life from this building. In the parking lot, his phone started buzzing with messages. First Tom, apologizing and saying he'd give Ethan the best reference he could manage. Then Maria, saying the cleaning crew was watching what happened to him, and some of them were talking to union organizers. Then Jennifer Martinez, the reporter, asking if he'd be willing to do a follow-up interview about his termination. And then, unexpectedly, David Park, the board member who'd listened to their presentation, who'd promised to think about it. The message was brief. Heard about Richardson's move. Not acceptable. Can we talk? Ethan called him from the parking lot, watching people stream into the building for their workday, while his own workday ended permanently. Mr. Cole? David's voice was crisp, businesslike. I'll be direct. Richardson's termination of you is political retaliation disguised as policy enforcement. It's also spectacularly bad optics for a company already under scrutiny for labor practices. I appreciate the concern, but I'm not sure what you can do about it. Richardson has the authority to terminate employees. He has authority to terminate employees for legitimate cause. But I've reviewed the security footage he's citing, and I've read the termination paperwork. His case for theft of proprietary information is shaky at best. You were cleaning a room where materials were left unsecured. That's negligence on the part of whoever left them, not theft on your part. Try telling that to Richardson. I intend to. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Richardson's actions are going to be reviewed, along with the broader question of whether his management approach aligns with the company's stated values. David paused. I can't promise outcomes, Mr. Cole, but I can promise that what happened to you won't go unchallenged. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. Because I've spent 40 years in business, and I've seen a lot of Richardson types. They're effective in the short term and toxic in the long term. They build companies that make money and lose souls. And I'm tired of being complicit in that model. David's voice softened slightly. Also, my daughter's a labor attorney. She read your interview and called me at midnight to give me a lecture about corporate responsibility and how board members have an obligation to actually govern instead of rubber stamping executive decisions. Apparently your story reminded her why she went into law in the first place. But despite everything, Ethan smiled. Tell your daughter thank you. Tell her yourself if you're willing to let her review your case. Pro bono, before you object about charity. She needs the practice, and you need the representation. This time, Ethan didn't refuse. Not because he'd abandoned his principles, but because sometimes accepting help wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Okay? Yes. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Richardson's a formidable opponent, and he's not going to back down easily, but at least you won't be fighting alone. After the call ended, Ethan sat in his car for a long moment, processing the whiplash of the morning. Fired and potentially facing legal action, but also with a board member willing to fight and a lawyer willing to help. It wasn't victory, and it wasn't defeat. It was the messy, uncertain middle ground where most real battles were actually fought. He drove to Rosa's apartment, where Mia would be after school. Rosa took one look at his face and pulled him into a hug without asking questions. Come in, mijo. Sit. I'll make coffee. Mia was at the kitchen table doing homework, and her eyes went wide when she saw him home so early. Daddy, what happened? He sat beside her, took her hand. I lost my job today, sweetheart. The man I've been having disagreements with decided he didn't want me working there anymore. Because you told the truth? Yeah, because I told the truth. Mia was quiet, processing. Then, are we going to be okay? It was the same question she'd asked before, and Ethan wished he had a better answer, but he'd promised himself a long time ago that he wouldn't lie to his daughter about their reality. I don't know yet, baby. Money's going to be tight for a while. We might have to make some changes, cut back on some things. But we're going to figure it out together, the way we always do. What kind of changes? Maybe moving to a smaller apartment. Maybe I pick up different work, whatever I can find. Maybe we ask for help when we need it instead of trying to do everything on our own. Rosa appeared with coffee and cookies, setting them on the table with the kind of gentle firmness that suggested arguing would be pointless. You'll stay for dinner, both of you. And Ethan, I meant what I said before. You're a good father. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. They stayed. Rosa made her famous arroz con pollo and refused to let Ethan help. So he sat with Mia and worked through her math homework while trying not to think about how many dinners like this they might need in the coming weeks. The equation was simple. No income plus fixed expenses equaled disaster. But sitting here in Rosa's warm kitchen with his daughter explaining fractions, disaster felt distant and abstract. That evening, back in their apartment, Ethan opened his laptop and started searching for jobs. Anything he was qualified for paid poorly, and most required references he didn't have, or certifications he couldn't afford to maintain. His engineering credentials were 3 years stale, and his recent work history was now tainted by a termination for cause that Richardson would undoubtedly advertise to anyone who called for verification. The applications blurred together: warehouse positions, delivery driving, retail work, anything that might cover rent and groceries while he figured out next steps. He filled out 12 applications before midnight, each one a small surrender to the reality that speaking up had cost him more than he'd calculated. His phone buzzed. Emma, this time, using Lauren's phone to text him. Hi, Mr. Cole. Mom said you lost your job because of mean people. That's not fair. Can Mia still come over on Saturday? I miss her. The message made his throat tight. 7-year-old logic that cut straight through adult complications to the thing that actually mattered: friendship and fairness, and the simple injustice of good people suffering for doing good things. He typed back, Hi, Emma. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Mean people being unfair. But yes, Mia can absolutely still come over on Saturday. She's been talking about showing you her favorite park. Good. Mom's really upset about what happened to you. She keeps saying words she told me not to say. Despite everything, Ethan laughed. He could picture Lauren pacing her expensive house, furious and helpless, probably cursing Richardson in language that would horrify her daughter. Tell your mom it's going to be okay. We'll figure it out. She says that too, that you'll figure it out because you're strong and smart and stubborn. What's stubborn mean? It means not giving up even when things are hard. Oh, then you're definitely stubborn. See you Saturday. Ethan set down his phone and looked around his apartment, the small, shabby, barely affordable space that was home because he'd made it home through sheer determination. 3 years ago, he'd walked away from his career and started over from nothing. He'd done it once. He could do it again. The difference was that 3 years ago he'd been invisible by choice, protecting himself and Mia by staying small and unremarkable. Now he was visible whether he wanted to be or not, and that visibility came with responsibilities he couldn't ignore. People like Maria and Tom and the other night workers were watching to see if speaking up changed anything or just got you destroyed. He was becoming a symbol, and symbols didn't get to quietly disappear back into the shadows. Saturday arrived with autumn rain and the kind of gray sky that matched Ethan's mood. But Mia's excitement about seeing Emma was bright enough to cut through the gloom, so they drove to the Whitmore house with Mia chattering about the book she wanted to share and whether Emma would like the origami crane she'd learned to fold. Lauren answered the door looking tired but determined, her expression softening when she saw Mia. Hi, Mia. Emma's been counting down the hours. She's upstairs in her room. Mia disappeared with the easy confidence of children who knew they were wanted, leaving Ethan and Lauren in the foyer that probably cost more than his entire year's salary. How are you holding up? Lauren asked. Applying for jobs, trying not to panic, the usual. The board meeting is Monday morning. David's pushing hard for a full review of Richardson's termination decision. That's good. Maybe. David's daughter called me yesterday. Rachel Park, she's representing you pro bono. She wanted me to know she's building a case for wrongful termination, and she thinks it's strong. I thought Richardson's case was airtight. Richardson thinks his case is airtight. Rachel thinks he's overconfident and sloppy. Apparently there's precedent for whistleblower protection even in cases involving confidential materials if the materials exposed illegal or unethical practices. Is cutting jobs to preserve profit margins illegal or unethical? Depends on how you frame it. If we can show the cuts violate labor regulations or create unsafe working conditions, maybe. Rachel's researching it now. Lauren paused. There's something else. The pilot program vote is also Monday. David's combined it with the Richardson review, making the board choose whether they want to back Richardson's approach or try something different. That's risky. If they back Richardson, the pilot program dies and I lose any legal leverage. If they back Richardson, I quit publicly, with a very detailed explanation of why. Lauren's expression was fierce. I'm done playing corporate politics while good people suffer. Either the board commits to actual change, or I walk away and take the PR disaster with me. Lauren, that's your career. My career isn't worth having if it's built on grinding people into dust for quarterly earnings. Emma asked me yesterday what I do for work, and I realized I couldn't explain it in a way that made me proud. I tell my 7-year-old daughter that kindness matters, and then I go to an office where kindness is weakness. That hypocrisy ends Monday, one way or another. Upstairs, they could hear the girls laughing. Ethan thought about Emma asking what stubborn meant, about Mia explaining that it meant not giving up when things were hard. Both of their daughters were learning what it meant to fight for something that mattered, even when the cost was high. Okay, he said. Monday. Whatever happens, we face it together. Together, Lauren agreed. Though I should warn you, Rachel's also filing a class action framework on behalf of all the night crew workers who were terminated or threatened. She thinks there's a pattern of retaliation that goes beyond just your case. There probably is. Richardson doesn't do anything small. Neither does Rachel, apparently. David says she's terrifying in a courtroom. They sat in Lauren's study while the girls played, drinking coffee and going over the presentation Lauren would make to the board. It was thorough, compelling, backed by data and moral arguments in equal measure. It deserved to work. Whether it would work was another question entirely. Evening came too fast. Mia appeared with Emma, both girls holding hands and looking somber. Do you have to go? Emma asked. Yeah, sweetheart. It's getting late, and we've got a big day Monday. What's Monday? Ethan and Lauren exchanged glances, silently debating how much to tell their daughters. Lauren knelt down to Emma's level. Monday is when some important people make some important decisions about how our company treats the people who work there. Mr. Cole is involved because he's been very brave about speaking up when things weren't fair. Will the important people listen? I hope so, baby. They should listen. Mr. Cole saved my life. That means he's a good person, and good people should be listened to. The logic was airtight in the way only children's logic could be. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Thank you, Emma. That's very kind of you to say. On the drive home, Mia was quiet until they were almost at their apartment. Then, Daddy, what happens Monday if the important people don't listen? Then we keep fighting, keep trying, keep telling the truth, even if people don't want to hear it. That sounds hard. It is hard. But you know what's harder? Staying silent when you know something's wrong. Your mom taught me that. I wish she was here. Me too, baby. Me too. Sunday passed in anxious preparation. Rachel Park sent over documents for Ethan to review and sign, her cover email brisk and professional. Mr. Cole, your case is stronger than Richardson thinks, but weaker than we'd like. Prepare for a long fight, but I do love a good fight, so that works out nicely. See you in court if necessary. Rachel. Tom called to say the night crew had pooled money to help cover Ethan's expenses until he found new work. Ethan tried to refuse, but Tom was insistent. These people see what you did and they want to help. Let them help. Maria texted photos of the night shift gathered in the break room, holding handmade signs. We stand with coal, and visibility matters, and justice for workers. The images made something in Ethan's chest crack open, not with despair, but with the terrible, fragile hope that maybe this fight was bigger than him, bigger than Richardson, maybe even big enough to actually change something. Monday morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of weather that felt like the world holding its breath. Ethan dressed carefully, the same button-down shirt he'd worn to meet Emma, the jeans that were his nicest pair, the watch Sarah had given him that still kept perfect time, armor against whatever came next. He dropped Mia at school with an extra-long hug and a promise to tell her everything when he picked her up. Then he drove to Whitmore Pharmaceuticals for what might be the last time, parking in the visitor lot because his employee badge had been deactivated. The board meeting was at 10 a.m. in the main conference room. Rachel Park met him in the lobby, mid-30s, dressed in a sharp suit, with her father's direct gaze and an energy that suggested she enjoyed difficult battles. "Mr. Cole, ready to make some corporate executives very uncomfortable?" "As ready as I'll ever be." "Good, because this is going to get ugly before it gets better. Richardson's already filed a motion to have you banned from the building. I filed a counter motion arguing your presence is necessary for the board to make an informed decision. We'll see who wins." They won. Barely. Richardson's face when Ethan walked into the boardroom was a study in barely controlled fury, but David Park had the votes to allow it. The room was full. All 12 board members, Richardson, Lauren, Margaret Chen, several lawyers Ethan didn't recognize. He was the only person present who'd ever cleaned this room, ever emptied its trash bins, ever made it ready for the important people to have important conversations. The irony wasn't lost on him. David called the meeting to order, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "We're here to address two interconnected issues: the proposed pilot program for improved labor policies and the recent termination of Ethan Cole. Both matters require our immediate attention and careful consideration. Richardson, you requested time to present your opposition to the pilot program. You have the floor." What followed was exactly what Ethan expected. Richardson presenting charts showing cost increases, warning about competitive disadvantages, arguing that compassion was financially irresponsible and that the company's primary obligation was to shareholders, not employees. It was polished, professional, and completely devoid of any recognition that the employees in question were human beings with lives and families and dignity that mattered. Then Lauren presented the counter-argument, the same data they'd developed together, showing long-term value in stability and workforce satisfaction, demonstrating that the pilot program could actually improve outcomes if given time to function. She was compelling, passionate, backed by solid research. She was also clearly fighting an uphill battle against board members who'd spent careers believing Richardson's worldview. Finally, David turned to Ethan. "Mr. Cole, you're here because your termination is directly connected to these policy discussions. Would you like to speak?" Ethan stood, acutely aware that every person in this room had more power, more money, more conventional authority than he would ever possess. But he'd stopped being invisible, and invisible men didn't get to change systems. "I'm not going to pretend I'm objective about this," he said. "I'm the janitor who got fired for telling the truth about working conditions. I'm biased, but I'm also the only person in this room who's actually lived the reality you're all debating. So here's what I know. I know what it's like to choose between paying for my daughter's medication and paying rent. I know what it's like to work a full shift and still not earn enough to cover basic expenses. I know what it's like to be talked about like you're a line item on a budget instead of a person with a name and a family and dreams that matter just as much as anyone's in this room." Ethan's voice was steady, but he could feel his heart hammering against his ribs. 12 pairs of eyes watched him with varying degrees of interest, skepticism, and in Richardson's case, barely concealed contempt. 3 weeks ago, I donated blood to save a child's life. I didn't do it because I expected gratitude or recognition. I did it because a scared little girl needed help, and I could provide it. That's all. But what happened after, that's when I realized something important. The same system that made me invisible for 3 years suddenly needed me to be visible for 20 minutes because I had something valuable: my blood. And once that crisis passed, the system tried very hard to make me invisible again. One of the board members, a woman in her 50s whose nameplate read Dr. Patricia Hayes, leaned forward slightly. "What's your point, Mr. Cole?" My point is that every single person working in this building has value beyond what they can produce in a crisis. The people who clean your offices, who maintain your equipment, who keep this place running, they're not just bodies filling positions. They're Maria, who sleeps in her car between shifts because she can't afford rent in this city. They're Tom, who's managed facilities for 12 years and still can't afford his wife's cancer treatments. They're Rosa, who watches my daughter for almost nothing because she understands what it's like to struggle and believes in helping people anyway. Richardson made a sound of impatience. This is emotional manipulation, not business analysis. You're right, Ethan said, turning to face him directly. It is emotional, because we're talking about human lives, and human lives are emotional. You want business analysis? Here it is. You're hemorrhaging institutional knowledge because your turnover is 38% annually in facilities and maintenance. You're losing productivity because exhausted, demoralized workers make mistakes and work slowly. You're creating a culture where people do the bare minimum because they know doing more won't be recognized or rewarded. That's not efficient. That's wasteful. We maintain industry standard metrics that treat people as disposable. And maybe that works for you in the short term, but I've read the research. Companies with better labor practices outperform companies with exploitative practices over 5, 10, 20-year horizons. Not because kindness is profitable, though it can be, but because stability and loyalty and institutional memory have measurable value that your quarterly reports don't capture. Dr. Hayes spoke again. You make compelling points, Mr. Cole, but implementing these policies represents significant cost increases at a time when we're facing competitive pressures. I understand that concern, but consider the cost of not implementing them. The PR damage from these news articles. How much has that cost you in stock price and reputation? The legal fees you're about to spend fighting Rachel Park's class action lawsuit, how much will that run? The talent you'll lose when word spreads that this company retaliates against workers who speak up, what's that worth? David was watching him with an expression that might have been approval. Those are valid considerations the board should weigh carefully. Richardson stood abruptly. I've listened to enough of this. Mr. Cole violated company confidentiality policies by photographing privileged documents. That's grounds for termination, regardless of his sob story about medical bills and single parenthood. The board needs to decide whether we're a serious business or a charity for people who can't manage their own lives. The cruelty of it hung in the air like something toxic. Ethan saw Lauren's face go white with anger, saw Rachel Park's hand tighten on her pen, saw several board members shift uncomfortably. But it was Dr. Hayes who responded, her voice ice cold. That was inappropriate, Richardson. Mr. Cole's personal circumstances are relevant context for evaluating labor policies, not ammunition for character assassination. I'm being realistic about the situation. You're being dismissive and cruel, which is exactly the management approach we're here to evaluate. Dr. Hayes turned to Ethan. Mr. Cole, I apologize for that comment. Please continue. Ethan took a breath, steadying himself. I don't need anyone's pity. I need this board to understand that the choice in front of you isn't between profitability and compassion. It's between short-term gains that erode your foundation and long-term investment in the people who actually make this company function. The pilot program Lauren proposed isn't radical. It's basic human decency translated into policy. Healthcare that actually covers medical needs, wages that allow people to afford housing, schedules that let parents be present in their children's lives. These aren't luxuries, they're fundamentals. Another board member, an older man whose nameplate read James Fitzgerald, cleared his throat. I've been on this board for 15 years. I've watched us grow from a mid-sized pharmaceutical company to an industry leader, largely through the efficiency measures Richardson champions. What you're proposing represents a fundamental shift in our operating philosophy. Why should we risk what's been successful? Because success built on exploitation is fragile, Ethan said. It works until it doesn't, and when it breaks catastrophically. You're seeing the early stages of that break right now. Negative press coverage, legal challenges, employee unrest. You can address it now through voluntary policy changes, or you can address it later through court-mandated settlements and regulatory intervention. But you will address it, because the current system isn't sustainable. That's speculation. It's pattern recognition. I spent 10 years as an aerospace engineer before I became a janitor. I know how to analyze system failures, how to identify stress points before they become critical failures. Your labor practices are a stress point, and the stress is increasing. The pilot program is preventive maintenance. Richardson's approach is waiting for catastrophic failure and then acting surprised when it happens. The room was silent for a moment. Then David spoke, his voice measured but firm. I think we've heard enough to make an informed decision. I'm calling for 2 votes. First, on whether to approve the pilot program as proposed. Second, on whether Mr. Cole's termination was justified or represents retaliation that should be reversed. Discussion before we vote? What followed was 45 minutes of intense debate that Ethan mostly observed in silence. Board members argued about cost-benefit analysis, legal exposure, competitive positioning, moral obligations. Richardson fought hard, bringing every argument about fiduciary duty and shareholder primacy and market realities. Lauren countered with data about long-term value creation and corporate sustainability. Rachel Park added legal perspectives about wrongful termination precedent and whistleblower protection. Through it all, Ethan watched the board members' faces, trying to read which way they were leaning. Some seemed genuinely moved by the arguments about human dignity. Others seemed focused purely on financial implications. A few seemed uncomfortable with the entire conversation, as if discussing workers as actual people violated some unspoken protocol about how business was conducted. Finally, David called for the vote on the pilot program. It passed. 7 votes in favor, 5 against. Barely. But it passed. The relief that washed through Ethan was so intense it left him dizzy. Lauren's face was radiant with cautious triumph. Richardson looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. Then came the second vote, on Ethan's termination. All those in favor of reversing Mr. Cole's termination and reinstating him with full back pay and benefits, indicate by raising your hand. Ethan held his breath. This one was more personal, less about policy and more about whether the board believed his actions had been justified. 6 hands went up. Then a 7th, Dr. Hayes, after a long moment of consideration. Then an 8th. 8 votes, a clear majority. Motion passes, David said. Mr. Cole's termination is reversed. Richardson, you'll work with HR to process his reinstatement immediately. Richardson's face went through several shades of red. This is a mistake. You're rewarding insubordination and setting a precedent that employees can leak confidential materials without consequences. We're correcting a retaliatory action that never should have occurred, Dr. Hayes said sharply. And we're setting a different precedent, that this company values truth-telling and doesn't punish employees for exposing legitimate concerns about labor practices. If you have a problem with that, Richardson, perhaps you should consider whether your management philosophy aligns with this board's direction. The implicit threat hung in the air. Richardson seemed to recognize he'd lost this battle, but his expression promised the war wasn't over. Fine, I'll process the reinstatement, but I want it on record that I oppose this decision and believe it undermines our operational authority. Duly noted, David said dryly. This meeting is adjourned. Lauren, I'd like you to stay behind to discuss implementation timeline for the pilot program. Mr. Cole, thank you for your time and your honesty. We'll be in touch about your return to work. The board members filed out, some nodding to Ethan as they passed, others avoiding eye contact. Richardson left without a word, his anger radiating like heat. When the room cleared, only David, Lauren, Rachel, and Ethan remained. Rachel extended her hand with a fierce grin. Well done, Mr. Cole. You're officially reinstated and Richardson's been put on notice. I'd call that a win. Thank you for everything. I know you took this case pro bono, and I'd do it again. Cases like this are why I went to law school, to make powerful people uncomfortable and to give voice to people who've been silenced. She glanced at her watch. I've got another client meeting, but I'll send you the documentation of today's decisions. Keep copies of everything. Richardson strikes me as someone who holds grudges. After she left, David turned to Ethan with an appraising look. You handled yourself well in there. Better than many executives I've seen present to the board. I had a lot riding on it. We all did. This company's been heading in a troubling direction for years. Maybe today we started correcting course. David paused. Lauren mentioned you have an engineering background, aerospace specifically. Used to. That was another life. Skills like that don't expire. Once we get the pilot program running, I'd like to talk to you about a different role. Something that uses both your technical expertise and your understanding of how this place actually functions. We need people who can see the whole system, not just the parts they're responsible for managing. Ethan wasn't sure what to say to that. An hour ago, he'd been unemployed and potentially facing legal action. Now he was reinstated, the pilot program had passed, and a board member was suggesting a career path that sounded suspiciously like it might involve not cleaning floors. "I appreciate that," he said carefully, "but right now I just want to get back to work and make sure the people who stood with me aren't forgotten once the attention fades." David smiled. "See? That's exactly the perspective we need more of around here. Think about it. No pressure, no timeline, just an open offer when you're ready." He left, and Ethan was alone with Lauren in the conference room where he'd cleaned up countless coffee cups and never imagined sitting at the table as an actual participant. "We did it," Lauren said, her voice shaky with relief and exhaustion. "We actually did it. You did it. You put your career on the line." "We both did. And Ethan, I know things aren't magically fixed. The pilot program has to be implemented carefully. Richardson's going to fight us every step of the way, and there's a lot of work ahead. But this is real change. Small, fragile, but real." "Yeah." Ethan looked around the boardroom, thinking about all the invisible people who'd made this space possible. "It's a start." His phone buzzed, a text from Tom. "Heard the news. Night crew is celebrating. You're officially our hero. Also, I need you back tonight if you're cleared to work. We're short-staffed and the third floor is a disaster." Ethan showed the message to Lauren, who laughed. "Back to reality already?" "That's the thing about being a janitor. The work doesn't stop just because you had a dramatic boardroom victory. You don't have to go back to that job. David's offer was genuine. You could transition to something that uses your actual qualifications. Maybe eventually, but right now, I need to be with the people who stood by me. I need to show them that speaking up didn't destroy me, that we can actually win sometimes if we fight together. Besides," he smiled tiredly, "someone has to make sure the pilot program actually helps the people it's designed for. Hard to do that from an executive office." Lauren nodded slowly. "You're right, as usual." She gathered her papers, then paused. "Emma asked me this morning if you and Mia wanted to come to her birthday party next month. She's very specific about wanting Mia there." "We'd love to. Tell her thank you." "I will. And Ethan, thank you for saving my daughter's life, for saving me from becoming someone I'm ashamed of, for reminding me that business is about people, not just numbers. You would have figured it out eventually." "Maybe. But I'm glad I didn't have to do it alone." Ethan left the building through the main entrance this time, not the service entrance he'd used for 3 years. The sun had broken through the clouds, turning the parking lot into a patchwork of light and shadow. His phone was still buzzing with messages, Maria and other night crew workers congratulating him, Rosa saying she'd known all along it would work out, Jennifer Martinez asking for a follow-up interview about the board's decision, and one from Mia, sent from the school office phone. "Dad, Mrs. Chen said you had an important meeting today. How did it go? I love you." He called her back immediately, not caring that he was standing in a corporate parking lot getting emotional. "It went well, baby. Really well. I got my job back and the company's going to make changes to help people like me." "So we're okay?" "We're okay. Better than okay. I'll tell you all about it when I pick you up from school." "I knew it would work out. You're stubborn, remember?" He laughed through the tightness in his throat. "Yeah, sweetheart, I'm stubborn." That night, Ethan returned to work for his regular shift. The night crew greeted him like a returning hero, handshakes and hugs and genuine celebration that they'd won something together. Tom pulled him aside with suspiciously bright eyes. "Proud of you, Cole. What you did, standing up to Richardson, refusing to back down, that took guts most people don't have. I didn't do it alone. Everyone who talked to reporters, who shared their stories, who stood up when they could have stayed quiet. That's what made the difference. Still, you went first. That matters." They worked through the night, and there was something almost sacred about it, returning to the familiar rhythm of cleaning and maintaining, making the building ready for the next day's workers, being part of the invisible infrastructure that kept everything running. Except Ethan didn't feel invisible anymore. He felt seen, acknowledged, valued, in a way that had nothing to do with emergency blood donations, and everything to do with being recognized as a person whose voice and experience mattered. Around 2 a.m., taking his break in the third-floor break room, his phone rang. Unknown number, which usually meant spam, but something made him answer. Mr. Cole? This is Amanda Vega from Metropolitan Hospital. I'm the Director of Volunteer Services. We heard about your blood donation and your situation with Whitmore Pharmaceuticals, and we wanted to reach out about a potential opportunity. Ethan was too tired to be anything but direct. What kind of opportunity? We're developing a program to connect universal blood donors with recipients who need regular transfusions. It's part community outreach, part medical matching service. We need someone to help design and implement the program, someone who understands both the technical medical side and the human experience of donation. Your background in engineering plus your recent experience makes you uniquely qualified. It would be part-time, flexible hours, and the pay is competitive with your current position. You want me to help run a blood donation program? More than that, we want you to help us build a system that makes donation more accessible and meaningful for everyone involved. Based on everything we've seen, you're exactly the kind of person who could make that vision work. It was surreal, receiving a job offer at 2 a.m. while taking a break from mopping floors. But then again, the past 3 weeks had been a masterclass in surreal. Can I think about it? Of course. Take your time. We're not in a rush. We'd rather do this right than do it fast. I'll email you the details tomorrow. After she hung up, Ethan sat in the break room staring at his phone. A month ago, he'd been invisible, struggling, trapped in a cycle of barely surviving. Now he had his job back, a pilot program that might actually help his coworkers, a potential new career direction, and maybe most importantly, proof that speaking up could lead to change instead of just destruction. It was fragile. Richardson was still there, still powerful, still opposed to everything they'd accomplished. The pilot program could fail. The hospital opportunity might not work out. All of it could collapse tomorrow. But tonight, sitting in a corporate break room at 2 a.m. with a mop bucket nearby and hope in his chest, Ethan let himself believe that maybe the world could be different than it had been. Maybe invisibility wasn't inevitable. Maybe systems could change if enough people fought for that change. Maybe one person's choice to help instead of walk away could ripple outward into something bigger than they'd ever imagined. He finished his shift as the sun came up, turning the city golden and new. When he clocked out, Tom was waiting with an envelope. "What's this?" "Back pay from your termination period. HR processed it this morning. Richardson tried to delay it, but Margaret Chen pushed it through personally." Ethan opened the envelope. A check for 2 weeks' wages plus overtime for the hours he'd have worked. It was enough to cover the rent increase and Mia's upcoming doctor's appointment with room left over. Not life-changing money, but enough to breathe easier for the first time in months. "Thank you, Tom, for everything. For believing in me when it would have been easier to stay neutral." "Are you kidding? You made us all visible, Cole. That's not something you thank someone for. That's something you remember forever." Ethan drove home through morning traffic, exhausted but settled in a way he hadn't been in years. At Rosa's apartment, Mia was already awake and eating breakfast, her face lighting up when he walked in. "Daddy, tell me everything!" He sat beside her and did exactly that, explaining the board meeting, the votes, the reinstatement, all of it in terms a 9-year-old could understand. She listened with fierce attention, asking questions that cut straight to the heart of things the way children's questions always did. "So the mean man didn't win?" "Not this time, baby. Not this time." "And the people you work with, they'll be treated better now?" "If the pilot program works the way it's supposed to, yes. We still have to make sure it actually gets implemented correctly, but we have a real chance to make things better." Mia was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "I'm proud of you, Daddy. You were scared, but you did the right thing anyway." Those words, coming from his daughter in Rosa's small kitchen with morning light streaming through the windows, felt like the only validation that mattered. Not the board's vote or the news articles or the job offers. Just Mia, understanding that her father had tried to be someone worth being proud of. "I learned that from your mom," he said softly. "She was always brave when it mattered." And from you. You're brave too. 3 weeks later, Ethan stood in Whitmore Pharmaceuticals' main lobby watching the official launch of the pilot program. There were employees from all departments, executives and maintenance workers, administrative staff and cleaning crew, all gathered to hear Lauren explain the new policies, healthcare improvements, wage increases, flexible scheduling for parents, mental health support, all the things they'd outlined in those late-night planning sessions, now becoming official company policy. It wasn't perfect. The changes were being implemented gradually, starting with a subset of departments. Richardson was still there, still fighting, still looking for ways to undermine the program. But it was real. It was happening, and people who'd been invisible for years were suddenly being treated like their well-being mattered. Lauren spotted Ethan in the crowd and gestured for him to join her at the front. He shook his head. This wasn't his moment to stand in the spotlight. But she was insistent, and eventually he made his way forward. Everyone, I want to introduce Ethan Cole. Many of you know his story, how he donated blood to save my daughter Emma, how he spoke up about working conditions when it would have been safer to stay silent, how he fought to make this pilot program happen. Ethan represents the kind of courage and integrity we should all aspire to. He's also agreed to serve as the employee liaison for the pilot program, making sure it actually serves the people it's designed to help. Please join me in thanking him. The applause was genuine, coming from people who understood what it had cost him to get here. Ethan saw Maria crying openly, saw Tom grinning with pride, saw dozens of faces that had been invisible alongside him for years now, looking at him with gratitude and hope. After the presentation, employees came up to thank him personally. Some were people he'd worked with for years. Others were strangers who'd just heard his story. All of them wanted to shake his hand, to tell him their own stories, to express hope that maybe things really could be different. Emma appeared in the crowd, holding Mia's hand, both girls weaving through the adults with the confidence of children who knew they belonged. Emma had regained most of her strength, moving with only a slight carefulness that reminded her she'd almost died. "Mr. Cole," Emma called, "we came to see your speech." "I didn't give a speech, sweetheart. That was your mom." "But she said you made all this happen, so it's kind of your speech too." Mia tugged on his hand. "Can we show Emma the park after this? The one with the good swings?" "Sure, baby, if it's okay with her mom." Lauren appeared, looking more relaxed than Ethan had ever seen her. "It's definitely okay. Actually, I was hoping we could all grab dinner after. My treat. There's a place nearby that Emma loves." They ended up at a casual Italian restaurant. Nothing fancy, just good food and comfortable atmosphere. The girls chattered about school and books and the science project they wanted to do together. Lauren and Ethan talked about implementation challenges for the pilot program, about resistance they'd face, about strategies for making sustainable change in systems designed to resist change. "David called me yesterday," Lauren said. "He wants to expand the program faster than we planned. Apparently 3 other board members have been getting calls from employees thanking them for the policy changes, and it's making everyone nervous about public perception if we move too slowly." "That's good, right?" "It's complicated. Moving too fast could create implementation problems that give Richardson ammunition to kill the whole thing. But moving too slow makes us look insincere." She sighed. "I never realized how hard it is to actually change systems, even when you have the power and the mandate to do it." "Welcome to what the rest of us have been dealing with forever," Ethan said with a slight smile. "Systems resist change. It's what they do. You just have to be more stubborn than the system." "There's that word again," Emma piped up from the other end of the table. "Stubborn. Mia says her dad is the most stubborn person she knows." "It's a compliment," Mia insisted. "Being stubborn means not giving up." "In that case," Lauren said, raising her water glass, "here's to being stubborn, to not giving up even when it's hard, to changing systems that need changing, and to the people brave enough to fight for what's right." They clinked glasses, water and juice and soda, and for a moment in that casual restaurant, Ethan felt something that had been missing for 3 years. Not just stability or security, but genuine hope that the future could be different than the past, that his daughter would grow up in a world where people who worked hard were treated with dignity, that Emma would grow up understanding her privilege came with responsibility, that maybe, just maybe, Their small victory could inspire others to fight their own battles against systems that needed changing. The hospital program started a month later. Ethan took the part-time position, working 3 evenings a week to help design and implement the blood donor matching system. It used his engineering skills, designing efficient processes, identifying bottlenecks, creating user-friendly interfaces, combined with his lived experience of what it meant to donate under crisis conditions. The pay was enough that, combined with his day shift at Whitmore, he could finally start paying down the medical debt that had haunted him for years. 6 months after the board meeting, the pilot program's first assessment showed measurable improvements. Employee turnover in participating departments had dropped by 42%. Productivity was up 18%. Healthcare utilization had increased, suggesting people were actually using the improved benefits to address medical needs they'd been ignoring. Most importantly, employee satisfaction scores had nearly doubled. Richardson fought every inch of expansion, but the data was undeniable. The board voted to extend the program company-wide, with full implementation over the next 2 years. It wasn't everything Ethan had hoped for. There were compromises and delays and watered-down provisions, but it was real progress affecting real people's lives. On the 1-year anniversary of Emma's accident, the Whitmores invited Ethan and Mia to a small celebration at their house. It was just the 4 of them plus Rosa, who'd become an honorary grandmother to both girls. They planted a tree in the backyard, an oak that would grow slowly but steadily, its roots deepening over time, becoming something permanent and strong. "To new beginnings," Lauren said, her hand on Emma's shoulder, "and to the people who make them possible." Emma looked up at Ethan with the directness of an 8-year-old who'd learned young that life was precious and fragile. "Thank you for saving me. I know I already said it, but I want to say it again because it's important." "You're welcome, sweetheart. I'm glad I could help. Mom says you saved her too, not just me, but her, that she was becoming someone mean, and you helped her remember how to be kind." Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "Emma, we talked about this being a private conversation, but it's true, and true things should be said out loud." Emma turned back to Ethan. "So thank you for saving both of us." Ethan knelt down to her level. "You know what? You saved me too. You and your mom both. I was disappearing, becoming invisible, and forgetting I used to be someone who solved problems and made things better. You reminded me I could still do that, so we saved each other. How about that?" Emma considered this seriously, then nodded. "Okay, that's fair." The girls ran off to explore the yard, and Rosa followed to supervise, leaving Ethan and Lauren standing by the newly planted tree. "She's right, you know," Lauren said quietly, "about you saving me. I was becoming someone I couldn't live with, someone Emma would have grown up ashamed of. You gave me a chance to be different. You did the hard work of actually being different. That's all you. We did it together, and we're not done. There's so much more to fix, so many more people who need help, so many more systems that need changing." "I know, but we made a start. Sometimes that's enough." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their daughters play in the fading sunlight. 2 families brought together by crisis, held together by the choices they'd made in the aftermath. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was no romance, no magical resolution of all problems, no guarantee that their progress wouldn't be undone by the next Richardson who came along. But it was real, and it was honest, and it was enough. Later that evening, driving home with Mia half asleep in the back seat, Ethan's phone buzzed. A message from David Park. "Board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. We're voting on whether to make you the new Director of Employee Experience and Organizational Culture. Richardson's opposed, but I think we have the votes. Interested?" Ethan pulled over to the side of the road, reading the message 3 times to make sure he understood it correctly. Director level. A position that would let him influence policy across the entire organization. Real power to make real changes for people like Maria and Tom, and all the others still struggling in the invisible infrastructure of corporate America. It was terrifying and exciting and completely unexpected. A year ago, he'd been a janitor facing termination. Now he was being offered an executive position. He typed back, "Very interested. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll be there." Mia stirred in the back seat. "Daddy, why did we stop?" "Just got some news, baby. Good news. I'll tell you about it when we get home." "Is it about your job?" Yeah, they want to promote me. Give me more responsibility to help more people. Even half asleep, Mia understood what that meant. That's good. You're good at helping people. I try to be. Mom would be proud. I'm proud too. Those words, I'm proud too, were worth more than any promotion or salary increase or recognition. They were the measure that mattered, the only real success Ethan cared about. If Mia was proud of who he was becoming, then everything else was just details. The next morning, the board voted to create the new position and offer it to Ethan. Richardson opposed it vigorously, arguing that promoting a former janitor to director level was inappropriate and undermines organizational hierarchy. But 8 board members disagreed and the motion passed. Ethan accepted with one condition, that his salary increase be used to fund additional positions in the Employee Experience Department, positions filled by current frontline workers who understood the issues from the inside. The board agreed, and within a month, Ethan had assembled a team that included Maria from night cleaning crew, Tom from facilities management, and 3 others whose names had never appeared in company directories, but whose expertise in actually doing the work was invaluable. Together, they expanded the pilot program, refined its implementation, addressed problems as they emerged, and slowly, methodically transformed how Whitmore Pharmaceuticals treated its workforce. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy, and there were setbacks and frustrations and moments when Ethan wondered if he was in over his head. But every time doubt crept in, he remembered standing in that hospital donation center, watching his blood flow out to save a stranger's child, making the choice to help because help was needed. That choice had rippled outward in ways he could never have predicted. One decision to be visible instead of invisible. One refusal to accept that systems couldn't change. One stubborn insistence that human dignity mattered more than corporate efficiency. It hadn't fixed everything. The world was still complicated, still unfair in countless ways, still full of Richardson types who believed power should flow one direction and stay there. But it had fixed something, had made life measurably better for hundreds of people, had proven that change was possible if you were willing to fight for it. 2 years after the board meeting that had changed everything, Ethan stood in the same conference room where he'd once cleaned coffee cups and never imagined sitting at the table. But today, he was presenting to the board as Director of Employee Experience, showing them data on how their investment in people had translated to concrete business outcomes. Lower turnover, higher productivity, better innovation, improved reputation. Everything Richardson had said was impossible, achieved through the simple radical act of treating workers like humans who mattered. After the presentation, David pulled him aside. "You've exceeded every expectation, Ethan. The board is impressed. I'm impressed. You've proven that compassion and business success aren't mutually exclusive. I just proved what frontline workers have always known, that people perform better when they're treated well. The real question is why it took a crisis and a near-death experience to get leadership to listen to that truth." David smiled. "Fair point. So what's next for you? Now that you've revolutionized our labor practices, are you going to rest on your laurels?" "Actually, I've been talking with other companies about implementing similar programs. Turns out there's a lot of demand for expertise in humane workplace transformation. I'm thinking about consulting on the side, helping other organizations figure out how to actually value their workers." "That's ambitious and needed. The industry is watching what we've done here. If you can replicate it elsewhere, you'll change corporate culture at a systemic level. That's the idea. Change one company and you help hundreds of people. Change the system and you help millions." That evening, Ethan picked up Mia from school. She was 11 now, growing tall and thoughtful, already showing signs of the person she'd become. They drove to the hospital where Ethan had a meeting about expanding the blood donor program, and Mia came along because she'd gotten interested in the medical side of things and wanted to learn. Walking through the hospital lobby where everything had started, Ethan thought about the man he'd been 2 years ago. Exhausted, invisible, barely surviving, held together by sheer stubbornness and love for his daughter. That man had made a choice in a moment of crisis, to help instead of walk away, to be visible instead of safe, to believe that one person's action could matter. He'd been right. It had mattered. Not in the dramatic movie-ending way where everything was fixed and everyone lived happily ever after, but in the real, complicated, ongoing way where small choices accumulated into meaningful change, where systems shifted slowly but genuinely, where people who'd been invisible for years suddenly had voices that mattered. "Daddy?" Mia asked as they waited for the elevator. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd just gone home that day, if we hadn't stopped to help Emma?" "Sometimes." "Why do you ask?" "Because everything's different now, because we stayed. Your job, our apartment, Emma being our friend, all of it. One choice changed everything." "Yeah, it did. But you know what? I think we would have ended up here eventually, just by a different path. Because the choice to help Emma wasn't really about that specific moment. It was about who we are, who we want to be. Those values would have led us somewhere, even if the path looked different." Mia considered this with the seriousness she brought to important questions. "So you're saying we make our lives through lots of choices, not just one big one?" "Exactly. Every choice to be kind when you could be cruel. Every choice to speak up when you could stay silent. Every choice to help when you could walk away. Those add up to who you become." The elevator arrived and they stepped in. As the doors closed, Mia slipped her hand into his. "Then I'm glad we're the kind of people who stay and help. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Ethan looked down at his daughter, this fierce, compassionate, impossibly wise child who'd lost her mother too young, but somehow emerged with her belief in human goodness intact. She was right. Being the kind of people who stayed and helped, who chose visibility over safety, who fought for change even when the odds were terrible, that was the choice that mattered. Not because it guaranteed success or promised happy endings or made life easier, but because it was right. And sometimes, when you got very lucky and worked very hard and refused to give up even when giving up made sense, being right was enough to change the world. One person at a time. One choice at a time. One stubborn refusal to accept that invisible people had to stay invisible. That was how systems changed. That was how the world became different. Not through grand gestures or perfect heroes, but through ordinary people making extraordinary choices in moments that mattered. And in the end, that was all any of them could do. Make those choices, fight those fights, plant those seeds, and hope they grew into something strong and lasting. Something like the oak tree in the Whitmore's backyard, putting down roots that deepened over time, becoming permanent and real. Ethan had given his blood to save a child. In return, he'd gotten his life back. Not the old life, but something better, something visible, something that mattered. And if that wasn't a fair trade, he didn't know what was. The elevator reached the 3rd floor. The doors opened. Ethan and Mia stepped out together into whatever came next, ready to face it the way they'd faced everything, with stubborn hope and the unshakable belief that kindness, in the end, was always worth the cost.